Section 1. Tonight, leave the modern world behind. As the day grows quiet, we'll journey into the forgotten corners of American history, where silent frontiers, lonely deserts, and distant mountains still whisper stories long buried by time. Have you ever wondered whether the Texas you imagine is only a small piece of the Texas that truly existed? Beyond stories of fearless cowboys, dramatic battles, and endless cattle trails lies an older landscape, one shaped by thousands of years of human lives that rarely appear in schoolbooks. The quiet rivers remember them, the wide grasslands remember them. Even the wind drifting across limestone hills seems to carry echoes that never entirely disappeared. Tonight you are invited to slow your pace and walk gently through that forgotten world. There is no rush here, only long horizons, soft evening light, and stories patiently waiting beneath the dust. Together we'll leave behind the famous legends for a while, and listen instead to quieter voices, the people who built homes, crossed rivers, watched stars traded across immense distances, and faced challenges that history sometimes overlooked. Their world was often harsher than the myths suggest, yet also far richer, stranger, and more beautiful. So before you settle into the story, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy seeing how far these bedtime journeys travel around the world. Now dim the lights, and let your breathing settle into the same gentle rhythm as the evening breeze crossing an immense landscape that stretches farther than your eyes can follow. You find yourself standing on a quiet ridge beneath a sky painted with fading shades of amber and violet. The last warmth of the sun still lingers against your skin while cooler air begins drifting upward from shaded valleys below. Around you lies a land that has not yet been called Texas. It has no state borders, no highways, and no familiar towns marked on maps. Instead, rivers wander wherever they please. Forests spread across rolling hills and open grasslands seem almost endless beneath the great dome of the sky. A chorus of insects begins its evening performance. Somewhere nearby, a mockingbird finishes one last song before darkness arrives. The scent of damp earth rises gently after a warm afternoon, mixed with the sweet fragrance of flowering prairie plants carried on a light breeze. Everything feels wonderfully unhurried. Long before European explorers reached this land, countless generations had already learned every curve of these rivers and every changing season. People here understood where fresh water emerged after dry summers, which valleys welcomed deer each autumn, and which plants quietly offered food or medicine throughout the year. Historians estimate that humans first entered North America more than 15,000 years ago, although new archaeological discoveries occasionally suggest that people may have arrived even earlier. Exactly when the earliest travelers reached what would become Texas remains an active discussion among researchers, with fresh evidence continuing to reshape old ideas. The uncertainty somehow makes the story even more fascinating. You imagine small family groups moving carefully across enormous landscapes during the closing chapters of the last ice age. Temperatures were cooler then, and parts of the world looked remarkably different. Massive glaciers covered much of northern North America, while Texas itself supported grasslands, woodlands, rivers, and wildlife unlike anything found today. It is difficult to picture at first, yet as twilight deepens, your imagination adjusts. You can almost hear distant footsteps upon ancient soil. The people walking here possessed no written language that survives for us to read. They left behind no towering monuments carved from stone. Instead, their history rests quietly beneath layers of earth, in carefully shaped spear points, cooking stones darkened by countless fires, fragments of woven fibers, animal bones, shells carried far inland, and campsites that reveal everyday routines more eloquently than grand palaces ever could. Each discovery tells only part of a story. Archaeologists patiently assemble those pieces like an enormous puzzle, whose edges remain forever unfinished. A broken tool beside a stream may suggest a hunting camp. Burned seeds preserved beneath layers of soil hint at seasonal meals. Tiny fish bones reveal that rivers supported far more than simple drinking water. Sometimes the smallest object changes everything. One carefully preserved footprint can reveal the presence of children. A cluster of hearths may suggest families gathering over many generations. Even ancient pollen trapped within muddy lake beds quietly records changing climates that shaped human decisions long before anyone could write about them. Researchers continue debating how different climate shifts influence migration across this region. Some believe prolonged droughts encouraged movement toward larger rivers, while others argue communities displayed remarkable resilience by adapting locally instead of relocating. Like many questions about distant history, certainty remains pleasantly out of reach. The prairie grows quieter now. A gentle breeze brushes against tall grasses, producing a soft whisper that seems almost like distant conversation. Fireflies begin appearing one by one among the stems floating lazily through the gathering darkness. Their tiny lights blink without hurry, as though even time itself has decided to slow down for the evening. You follow a narrow game trail toward a broad river. Its surface reflects the first stars with remarkable clarity. Along muddy banks stand cottonwood trees, whose leaves flutter with the faintest breeze, creating a gentle applause overhead. The cool air carries the earthy scent of water mixed with damp clay and crushed reeds beneath your feet. This river is far older than memory. For thousands of years, it has quietly welcomed travelers' wildlife and entire communities. Rivers were never merely obstacles. They served as pathways, meeting places, reliable sources of fish, and natural guides through otherwise immense landscapes. Modern highways often follow similar routes. Long before engineers surveyed roads, rivers had already solved the problem of travel. Nearby, you imagine smoke rising gently from evening campfires. Families prepare meals gathered through careful observation of seasonal rhythms. Children laugh while chasing each other near the safety of familiar adults. Elders share stories beneath darkening skies, preserving knowledge through spoken words rather than written pages. Those stories mattered enormously. Without books or maps, memory itself became a living library. Every generation inherited practical wisdom about weather animals, edible plants, dangerous places, and sacred traditions. Forgetting carried real consequences. Remembering helped entire communities survive. Perhaps someone points upward toward familiar constellations. The same stars shined above you tonight. Although thousands of years separate your lives, you both look toward identical patterns crossing the night sky. Orion will eventually rise. The Milky Way stretches overhead in breathtaking silence. Planets drift patiently through darkness exactly as they always have. That realization feels comforting. History often appears distant because dates create invisible walls between ourselves and those who lived before us. Yet beneath the stars, those walls seem surprisingly thin. The people who once rested beside these rivers experienced curiosity, affection, grief, hope, humour, and quiet evenings remarkably similar to this one. The land remembers all of them, not through written names, but through enduring rhythms repeated across countless generations. As darkness settles completely across the ancient landscape, the sounds of daytime slowly surrender to nighttime voices. Frogs begin singing along hidden ponds. Crickets continue their steady chorus. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant owl calls softly into the warm Texas night. The journey has only just begun. Ahead lie forgotten nations, ambitious explorers, fragile settlements, powerful horse empires, quiet tragedies, remarkable resilience, and countless stories hidden beneath more familiar legends. Tonight, however, you simply stand beside an ancient river, breathing cool evening air, listening carefully to a world that existed long before anyone called this place Texas. And the river keeps flowing, just as it always has, just as it always will. Section 2. Morning arrives so gently that you almost miss the moment when darkness finally loosens its grip on the land. A pale ribbon of silver appears above the eastern horizon, and slowly the immense Texas sky begins filling with soft shades of blue, rose and gold. Dew clings to tall grasses around your feet. The air feels cool against your hands, carrying the clean scent of cedar-damp earth and distant river water. Birdsong arrives before sunlight. One voice begins, then another answers from a nearby grove of oak trees. Soon the entire landscape seems awake, not with noise, but with quiet purpose. You continue walking through a country that still belongs entirely to its first peoples, long before European kingdoms imagined drawing borders across it. Popular history often tells this story as though Texas waited empty for explorers to arrive. It never did. For thousands of years, this immense region supported hundreds of communities whose lives changed with the seasons but remained deeply connected to the land. They did not build towering stone cities like the Maya farther south, nor vast imperial capitals like those of central Mexico. Their achievements were different. They created flexible societies capable of thriving across deserts, forests, coastal marshes, winding rivers, and seemingly endless plains. Their strength was adaptation. Rather than forcing the land to obey them, they learned to move with it. You imagine yourself following a well-worn trail that countless generations have walked before you. It curves gently around limestone outcrops before descending toward a broad river valley where smoke rises from several distant camps. The scent of mesquite wood drifts lazily through the cool morning air, mixing with the aroma of roasting fish and freshly gathered pecans. Children are already awake. Some help carry woven baskets filled with wild onions, berries, and edible roots collected at first light. Others chase each other along the riverbank, laughing as small birds scatter into the reeds. Nearby older hunters carefully inspect stone spear points, running experienced fingers along edges sharpened through patient craftsmanship. Nothing here feels hurried. Daily life follows rhythms refined over centuries. Modern archaeologists have uncovered evidence showing that many indigenous peoples living in what became Texas practiced remarkably sophisticated seasonal planning. Communities often moved throughout the year, not because they lacked permanent homes, but because mobility itself allowed them to harvest different resources as they became available. Spring offered fresh plants, summer brought abundant fish and ripening fruits, autumn filled forests with nuts and game. Winter encouraged gathering in more sheltered locations where resources remained dependable. To outside observers unfamiliar with this way of living, such movement might have appeared random. It was anything but. Every journey reflected careful knowledge accumulated across generations. As you continue walking, you notice how expertly people understand every feature of the landscape. Someone pauses beside an ordinary-looking shrub and collects leaves valued for medicine. Another recognizes animal tracks almost invisible upon dry soil. A grandmother quietly points toward clouds gathering above distant hills, predicting tomorrow's weather with confidence earned through lifelong observation. The land speaks constantly. These communities simply know how to listen. Historians generally agree that dozens of distinct cultural groups occupied different parts of ancient Texas before European arrival. Among them were the Caddo in the east, whose farming villages became centers of trade and diplomacy, the Jumano traders, who traveled astonishing distances across the southwest, the Karankawa along the Gulf Coast, and many others whose histories survive through archaeology, oral traditions, and careful scholarship. Yet many details remain uncertain. Some researchers continue debating exactly how large certain populations became before European diseases transformed the continent. Others question how closely neighboring groups cooperated during periods of drought or conflict. The evidence often suggests several possibilities rather than one simple answer. History rarely behaves neatly. You reach a broad clearing where several families have gathered, beneath towering oak trees. Women weave baskets from flexible river cane while quietly exchanging stories. The rhythmic movement of their hands appears almost effortless. Nearby, an elderly craftsman shapes a new atlatl, the spear-throwing tool that dramatically increased hunting power long before bows became widespread across every region. Each movement seems deliberate. Nothing is wasted. Even broken stone flakes scattered around the workshop will later serve smaller purposes. Animal hides become clothing blankets, water containers, and shelter coverings. Bones transform into needles, fish hooks, and carving tools. Plant fibers become cord nets and carrying straps. Sustainability was never a fashionable slogan. It was simply life. The morning breeze grows warmer as sunlight filters through the leaves overhead. You brush your hand against rough oak bark, still cool from the night. Somewhere beyond the trees, a woodpecker taps patiently against an old trunk, while insects hum softly among wildflowers covering the prairie. The atmosphere feels deeply peaceful, yet survival still demands constant attention. Food does not appear automatically. Children learn practical skills almost as soon as they can walk. They observe which berries remain safe throughout changing seasons, where turtles bask beside streams, how fish respond to shifting water levels, and when migrating birds return each year. Knowledge arrives slowly, but it stays for life. One particularly fascinating aspect of indigenous Texas involved long-distance trade. Archaeological discoveries reveal shells from the Gulf Coast appearing hundreds of miles inland, while obsidian originating far beyond Texas reached communities through extensive exchange networks. Imagine those conversations. People speaking different languages, meeting peacefully beside rivers or open grasslands, exchanging not only valuable materials, but songs, customs, stories, and ideas. Long before railroads connected Texas, invisible highways already stretched across the continent. Trade carried culture, not just objects. Some scholars even believe these networks transmitted innovation surprisingly quickly between distant communities. Others suggest cultural change remained more gradual, shaped primarily by local traditions rather than outside influence. The archaeological evidence continues inspiring lively debate among specialists today. You pause beside a small garden where several women tend carefully cultivated crops. Contrary to popular myths, not every indigenous Texan depended solely upon hunting. In eastern regions especially, farming supported substantial populations. Corn rises proudly above rich soil. Beans climb naturally beside sturdy stalks. Squash spreads broad leaves across the ground below. Together, these crops formed what many native societies called the Three Sisters, each helping the others grow successfully. Corn provided support for climbing beans. Beans enriched the soil with nitrogen. Squash shaded the ground, reducing moisture loss while discouraging weeds. Nature rewarded cooperation. People noticed. The scent of freshly turned earth mingles pleasantly with flowering plants growing nearby. Bees drift lazily between blossoms, completely unconcerned by your quiet presence. Overhead hawks circle upon invisible currents of warm air beginning to rise from sunlit hillsides. Time seems wonderfully unimportant. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest gifts. When you slow enough to observe ordinary moments, famous events lose their monopoly on significance. Empires rise and fall, borders appear and disappear. Yet breakfast still needs preparing, children still ask questions, elders still share wisdom beneath familiar trees. Life continues. Across the clearing, laughter erupts as a young boy proudly displays a fish that appears almost as large as his arm. Adults smile with gentle amusement while pretending to admire the impressive catch even more dramatically than it deserves. Some things never change. Families have always celebrated small victories. The Texas often remembered today revolves around dramatic battles, larger-than-life heroes, and sweeping political change. Those stories certainly matter, yet they rest upon thousands of quieter years filled with ordinary mornings remarkably like this one. People planting gardens, repairing tools, teaching children, sharing meals, watching seasons return. Without those countless peaceful days, the later history of Texas could never have unfolded. As the sun climbs higher, you leave the village behind and continue following the river westward. The morning air gradually loses its coolness, replaced by gentle warmth spreading across open grasslands shimmering beneath endless sky. Far ahead, new journeys await, new peoples, new misunderstandings, new encounters that will forever alter this remarkable land. For now, though, the voices of the first Texans still travel upon the breeze, reminding you that every famous chapter begins with thousands of forgotten lives lived quietly, wisely, and deeply connected to the world around them. The river continues beside you, patient as ever, waiting for the next story. Section 3. The river slowly bends southward and you follow its gentle curve beneath a sky that has become brilliantly clear. The morning warmth settles comfortably across the open country, while scattered clouds drift lazily overhead like slow-moving ships upon an endless blue sea. Every few moments a breeze passes through the prairie grasses carrying the earthy scent of sage wildflowers and sun-warmed cedar. The land feels timeless. You pause beside a shallow stream where clear water slips quietly over smooth limestone. Dragonflies hover above the surface, their delicate wings catching flashes of sunlight. Tiny fish dart between shadows beneath the rocks, while turtles rest upon fallen logs entirely unconcerned by your silent presence. It would be easy to believe this place will remain unchanged forever. History, however, rarely grants such wishes. Far beyond the horizon, across an ocean, no one here has ever seen kingdoms or expanding their ambitions. European rulers compete for wealth, prestige, and influence. Merchants dream of profitable trade routes. Priests hope to spread Christianity into distant lands. Explorers search for passages that exist only on hopeful maps. None of that seems important here. Not yet. The people living across this immense landscape continue following rhythms refined through countless generations. Villages rise and fall with the seasons. Hunters follow migrating game. Farmers tend growing fields. Traders carry shells, hides, pigments, and finely crafted tools across astonishing distances. The world already feels complete, yet somewhere beyond the imagination sails are slowly appearing on unfamiliar seas. You continue westward until the prairie gradually gives way to rougher country. Low hills rise ahead, their rocky slopes covered with juniper, live oak, and clusters of prickly pear cactus. The air becomes drier, carrying the sharp fragrance of crushed cedar leaves beneath your boots. A hawk circles silently above. Everything appears peaceful. Then you notice something unusual. Fresh hoofprints. Not deer, not bison, something different. Of course, wild horses have long vanished from North America thousands of years earlier. The enormous Ice Age mammals that once shared these lands disappeared long before anyone alive can remember. For generations, no one living here has known the sight of a horse. That absence is difficult to imagine. Later history will become inseparable from horseback riding cattle drives and sweeping charges across open plains. Yet for now, every journey depends upon human feet canoes, along rivers, or dogs carrying modest burdens. The landscape moves at walking speed. You climb another ridge and pause beneath the shade of a sprawling oak. Its thick branches provide welcome relief from the strengthening afternoon sun. Cicadas begin their steady chorus, filling the warm air with a sound that rises and falls almost like slow breathing. The smell of warm stone surrounds you. Nearby, several travelers approach along a narrow trail. They carry woven bags, carefully shaped stone blades, and bundles of dried meat wrapped in animal hides. Their clothing reflects practical knowledge rather than decoration alone. Soft buckskin protects against thorny brush. Woven sandals suit rocky ground. Carefully sewn pouches hold tools essential for long journeys. One traveller smiles politely, another offers a respectful nod. Even without sharing language, kindness remains surprisingly recognizable. Trade routes across ancient Texas often connected people separated by hundreds of miles. Historians have found evidence that materials such as Gulf Coast shells, colorful minerals, and rare stones traveled remarkable distances through networks of exchange stretching across much of North America. Goods were only part of the journey. Ideas traveled too. New hunting techniques, fresh artistic designs, different stories, perhaps even unfamiliar songs carried from one campfire to another. Exactly how extensive these cultural exchanges became remains an active topic among archaeologists. Some believe communication reached farther than previously imagined, while others argue regional traditions remained stronger than outside influences. The evidence continues, inviting thoughtful debate. You continue walking together for several miles. Conversation flows naturally among the travellers, punctuated by occasional laughter. Someone points toward distant hills while explaining a safer route around rough terrain. Another shares dried berries gathered during the previous week. Hospitality appears quietly woven into daily life. Eventually the group stops beside a spring emerging from fractured limestone. Crystal clear water gathers in a shallow pool before continuing downhill through moss-covered rocks. Everyone kneels to drink. The water tastes wonderfully cold. Its freshness carries the faint mineral flavour unique to underground springs. Places like this become far more than convenient rest stops. They serve as reliable meeting points, landmarks and centres of memory. Generations remember where dependable water survives even during harsh summers. In Texas, water is history, always has been. As afternoon light softens slightly, distant movement catches your attention. Several unfamiliar figures appear upon another ridge. At first they seem almost ordinary, then sunlight flashes against something metallic. That brief glimmer feels strangely out of place. The travellers beside you notice it as well. Conversations become quieter. No panic spreads through the group, only curiosity mixed with understandable caution. Historians generally agree that the first Europeans entered parts of present-day Texas during the early 16th century. One of the earliest documented expeditions belonged to the Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda, who mapped portions of the Gulf Coast in 1519. A few years later, other expeditions ventured farther inland, though exactly where some travelled remains uncertain. Maps from that era often contained surprising mistakes. Coastlines appeared distorted, rivers wandered inaccurately. Entire mountain ranges sometimes existed only in hopeful imagination. European explorers understood far less about this vast country than later generations often assume. The distant strangers slowly approach. Their clothing looks heavy beneath the Texas sun. Leather boots raise small clouds of dust, metal helmets reflect brilliant afternoon light. Long cloaks stir gently in the breeze, and beside them walk animals unlike anything the local communities have ever seen. Horses. Magnificent creatures, powerful yet graceful. The indigenous families watching from nearby hills remain perfectly still. Children peer cautiously from behind older relatives. Hunters quietly study every movement with practiced attention. Imagine witnessing such animals for the first time. Tall enough to carry a human, strong enough to cover astonishing distances, fast beyond belief. Some later accounts claim that frightened observers briefly believed horse and rider formed a single mysterious being. Historians remain cautious about these stories because many originated decades after the events themselves, shaped by European writers eager to dramatize first encounters. Reality was likely more complex. Curiosity often outweighs fear. The Spanish expedition also brings unfamiliar objects. Iron tools, steel swords, religious crosses, strange fabrics, new languages carried across thousands of miles of ocean. They also unknowingly carry something invisible. Diseases. No one understands germs. Neither the newcomers nor the people greeting them realize that microbes sometimes travel more effectively than armies. Epidemics will eventually reshape entire societies throughout the Americas, often reaching communities long before Europeans themselves arrive. One of history's greatest tragedies begins silently, not with battles, but with breath. Standing quietly beneath the oak, you sense that both groups view one another with equal fascination. Each wonders about the other's homeland customs, beliefs, and intentions. Neither side can see the centuries ahead. Neither knows how profoundly this meeting will transform the future. Some encounters will involve a cooperation, others misunderstanding, some genuine friendship, others heart-breaking conflict. History seldom chooses only one path. The afternoon breeze strengthens rustling leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby, a dove calls softly from the branches, its gentle rhythm blending with the distant murmur of flowing water. For one quiet moment, everything pauses. Two worlds simply observe one another. No famous battle unfolds. No dramatic speeches echo across the hills. Only cautious people standing beneath the same enormous Texas sky, wondering who these strangers might be and what tomorrow could possibly bring. The answer will arrive slowly, year after year, generation after generation, as the sun begins its gradual descent toward the western horizon. Long shadows stretch across the prairie once more. You continue your journey beside the ancient river, knowing that the quiet meeting you have just witnessed marks not an ending, but the beginning of one of the most complicated chapters in Texas history. The wind carries both voices away, together, into the coming evening. Section 4. The afternoon slowly gives way to evening once again. Golden sunlight pours across the rolling hills, turning every blade of prairie grass into a ribbon of amber. Long shadows stretch between clusters of live oaks, while the air begins to cool just enough for the scent of cedar and damp soil to become more noticeable. Somewhere nearby, a creek slips quietly over smooth stones, its gentle murmur blending with the distant calls of meadowlarks preparing for night. You continue walking. The first meetings between Spanish explorers and the people of this land have passed, but their consequences are only beginning to unfold. No one alive can yet imagine how many lives will be changed by these cautious encounters. History rarely announces its turning points with loud fanfare. Sometimes they arrive as a quiet conversation, sometimes as a shared meal, sometimes as a misunderstanding that grows larger with every passing year. Ahead, the familiar sound of church bells drifts softly through the evening air. It is an unexpected sound in this vast wilderness. As you climb another gentle rise, the source slowly appears before you. A small Spanish mission stands beside a winding river, its pale limestone walls glowing warmly beneath the setting sun. Smoke rises from cooking fires beyond its courtyard, while fields of corn beans and squash stretch toward the nearby hills. The mission is more modest, far smaller than many people imagine. Hollywood often portrays these places as grand fortresses standing proudly above the frontier. The reality was usually far humbler. Most missions were isolated communities struggling against distance, harsh weather, disease, and limited supplies. Their greatest challenge was often loneliness. You step closer along a dusty path. The smell of fresh bread baking inside clay ovens mingles with smoke from mesquite fires. Chickens scratch beneath nearby trees while goats wander lazily across open ground. Somewhere within the mission walls, a blacksmith rhythmically strikes glowing iron, each measured blow echoing across the quiet valley. Life here follows its own rhythm. Spanish missionaries established dozens of missions across Texas beginning in the late 17th century. Their purpose extended beyond religion alone. The Spanish crown hoped missions would spread Christianity, encourage permanent settlements, strengthen territorial claims, and create loyal communities in regions where European influence remained fragile. Faith and politics often traveled together. Neither journeyed alone. The Franciscan missionaries who lived here genuinely believed they were saving souls. Many devoted their entire lives to this difficult work, enduring exhausting travel, unfamiliar climates, and enormous personal sacrifice. They planted crops, taught European farming methods, introduced livestock, and cared for the sick whenever possible. Yet the story remains far more complicated. The indigenous families arriving at these missions often carried their own hopes, fears, and reasons for coming. Some sought protection from rival groups or prolonged drought. Others hoped to gain access to reliable food during difficult seasons. Some came willingly. Others did not. Many historians emphasize that no single experience represents every mission across Texas. Some communities developed cooperative relationships marked by mutual adaptation. Others experienced coercion, cultural suppression, and growing resentment. The historical record reflects remarkable variety rather than one universal story. You enter the courtyard quietly. Children chase one another between simple stone buildings, laughing as they weave around stacked baskets of harvested vegetables. A woman kneels beside a grinding stone, slowly turning corn into fine meal. Nearby, an elderly indigenous craftsman carefully repairs a woven basket while speaking softly with a Spanish friar. The conversation appears relaxed. Neither man seems hurried. Their words flow slowly despite obvious differences in language. Communication requires patience. Gestures become important. Smiles matter. Sometimes a shared meal explains more than vocabulary ever could. The evening breeze carries the fragrance of sage and fresh herbs growing in small garden plots. Bees drift lazily among flowering plants while swallows dart overhead, catching insects before darkness settles completely across the valley. Everything feels peaceful. Yet beneath the calm surface, quiet tensions continue growing. Inside one workshop, several indigenous artisans shape pottery using techniques refined over countless generations. Nearby Spanish craftsmen demonstrate unfamiliar metal tools capable of cutting wood more efficiently than polished stone. Neither tradition disappears overnight. Instead, they begin influencing one another. Some local communities adopt iron knives because they prove remarkably useful. Spanish settlers gradually learn which native plants offer reliable medicines during illness. Agricultural knowledge flows both directions. New foods appear upon familiar tables. Cultural exchange rarely moves in only one direction. It resembles a river, always flowing, always changing. You notice horses grazing peacefully beyond the mission walls. Only a few decades earlier, these animals had been complete strangers to North America. Now they quietly transform transportation, hunting, communication, and eventually entire societies across the Great Plains. At first, relatively few indigenous communities possess horses. That will soon change dramatically. Exactly how horses spread so quickly across Western North America remains a fascinating topic among scholars. Some researchers argue Spanish settlements unintentionally released enough animals to establish wild populations. Others believe trade networks distributed horses much faster than colonial officials realized. However it happened, the results proved extraordinary. Within generations, horse culture would reshape much of Texas. A bell rings softly from the mission chapel. Its gentle sound drifts across the valley before disappearing into the evening sky. Families gradually gather for prayer. Some participate comfortably. Others observe quietly, blending older spiritual traditions with unfamiliar Christian rituals. Historians continue debating exactly how deeply conversion reached many mission communities. Public ceremonies often tell only part of the story. Private beliefs remain harder to measure. Faith lives quietly, sometimes beyond written records. As darkness approaches, supper begins. The aroma of roasted venison mixes with corn porridge beans and squash and fresh bread baked from European wheat. The meal itself reflects two worlds gradually becoming intertwined. Native crops stand beside imported grains. Local herbs season unfamiliar recipes. History occasionally tastes delicious. Children certainly seem unconcerned by political questions. They simply enjoy warm food after a long day's work. Watching them laugh together, it becomes easier to remember that history is never experienced as a textbook. Most people spend their days raising families, repairing roofs, tending gardens, and hoping tomorrow's weather remains favorable. Ordinary life continues, even during extraordinary times. Outside the mission walls, however many indigenous communities choose different paths. They continue preserving traditional ways of life across forests, plains, rivers, and coastal regions. Texas remains enormous, and Spanish influence reaches only small portions of its vast landscape. Maps often exaggerate control. Reality proves far messier. Remote settlements struggle constantly with shortages of food, clothing, livestock, and building materials. Supply caravans may take months to arrive from Mexico. Floods wash away roads. Drought ruins harvests. Disease affects both settlers and native communities alike. Isolation becomes a daily companion. Not every mission survives. Some are abandoned after repeated attacks or environmental hardship. Others relocate to more favorable locations. A handful eventually grow into important towns whose names still appear upon modern maps. The future quietly begins here. You leave the mission as stars gradually emerge overhead. The evening air feels wonderfully cool after the day's warmth. Crickets begin their familiar chorus while bats sweep gracefully across the darkening sky, hunting insects invisible in the fading light. Behind you, the mission bell rings one final time. Its echo lingers only a moment, then silence gently returns. Walking beneath countless stars, you reflect upon the people you have met today. Missionaries carrying sincere convictions. Indigenous families balancing adaptation with tradition. Children who belong naturally to both worlds without fully realizing the historical significance surrounding them. No simple heroes appear, no simple villains either. Only human beings doing their best within circumstances far more complicated than legends often allow. Ahead, the frontier stretches farther west. Beyond those distant hills lie communities that will resist Spanish influence, entirely powerful nations whose stories remain largely untold in a horse empire unlike anything North America has ever witnessed. The night grows deeper, the breeze grows cooler, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another forgotten chapter of Texas patiently waits beneath the stars. Section 5. The stars gradually fade into a soft grey dawn. A cool mist lingers above the river, drifting slowly across the water before dissolving beneath the first rays of sunlight. The prairie seems to awaken one quiet sound at a time. Crickets surrender the night to songbirds. A coyote's distant call gives way to the cheerful chatter of sparrows hidden among the live oaks. The fresh scent of wet grass mixes with the earthy aroma of limestone warmed by yesterday's sun. You continue your journey. The mission you left behind now disappears into the morning haze, its church bell becoming only a faint memory carried by the breeze. Ahead lies an enormous landscape that European maps still struggle to understand. Even the maps themselves tell a story. You imagine a Spanish cartographer sitting beside a rough wooden table hundreds of miles away, carefully drawing rivers, mountains, forests, and settlements from scattered reports brought by exhausted travellers. His ink moves confidently across parchment, yet much of the land before him remains unseen. Large empty spaces fill the page. Blank regions stretch between winding rivers. Unknown territory. Or so the map suggests. The reality beneath your feet is entirely different. The idea that Texas was an empty wilderness awaiting discovery remains one of history's most persistent myths. European maps often appeared strangely vacant, leading later generations to assume few people lived here before colonization. Nothing could be further from the truth. The blank spaces reflected European uncertainty, not human absence. Across this immense region, countless indigenous communities hunted, farmed, traded, gathered, celebrated, mourned, and travelled along ancient routes invisible to foreign mapmakers. They simply organised their world differently than European kingdoms expected. Ownership itself meant something different. Many native societies measured belonging through relationships with rivers, hunting grounds, sacred places, seasonal movements, and neighbouring communities rather than fixed property lines scratched upon paper. The land could not be folded into a document. It had to be lived. You walk through an open prairie where tall grasses sway gently in waves beneath the morning wind. Wildflowers scatter patches of yellow, purple, and white across the rolling landscape. Butterflies drift lazily from blossom to blossom, while meadowlarks sing from weathered fence posts that in your own time have not yet been built. The openness feels almost endless. Yet hidden within it are familiar pathways. As your eyes gradually adjust, faint trails begin appearing beneath the grass. They curve naturally around rocky outcrops, follow reliable water sources, and connect distant valleys with remarkable efficiency. These are highways, not paved with stone, but with memory. For generations, travelers have followed these routes across Texas. Hunters know where buffalo herds tend to cross rivers during seasonal migrations. Traders understand which valleys offer dependable springs. Families recognize sheltered campsites protected from winter winds. Knowledge it replaces signposts. Experience becomes the Historians studying archaeological evidence have discovered that many of these ancient travel corridors remained useful for centuries. Remarkably, several later Spanish roads and eventually modern highways followed routes already established by indigenous peoples long before Europeans arrived. The shortest path rarely needs inventing. Someone usually found it first. You pause beneath a cluster of pecan trees whose branches cast soft shadows upon the ground. Their leaves rustle quietly overhead, while squirrels dart along the limbs, occasionally dropping shells that bounce harmlessly through the grass. Nearby, several travellers approach, carrying woven packs. Their journey appears relaxed. No one seems lost. A young woman kneels briefly beside a weathered limestone marker. At first glance, it appears entirely ordinary, yet older members of the group acknowledge it with quiet familiarity before continuing onward. Perhaps it marks a reliable spring, perhaps a traditional meeting place, perhaps a story remembered only through generations of spoken tradition. Not every landmark requires words carved into stone. Some survive simply because people remember. Oral history served as an extraordinarily sophisticated system for preserving information. Elders taught younger generations not only family histories, but detailed knowledge of geography, weather patterns, medicinal plants, diplomacy, and sacred traditions. Every story carried purpose. Some explained rivers, others warned against dangerous places. Many helped people navigate landscapes more effectively than any written guide. Modern researchers increasingly recognize the remarkable accuracy preserved within many indigenous oral traditions. Although details naturally evolved through generations of storytelling, core geographic and environmental knowledge often remained surprisingly consistent over centuries. Memory became infrastructure, invisible, yet dependable. The morning sun climbs steadily higher. Warmth spreads gently across the prairie while cicadas begin their rhythmic chorus among the cedar trees. You brush your fingers across tall grasses still damp with dew, feeling cool droplets disappear almost instantly beneath the strengthening sunlight. Ahead, smoke rises from another seasonal gathering. Families from different communities have arrived beside a broad river crossing, where trade celebration and diplomacy quietly unfold together. Children race between camps. Dogs wander hopefully near cooking fires. The rich aroma of roasting venison mingles with fresh fish, toasted acorns, and corn cakes cooking upon heated stones. The atmosphere feels welcoming. People exchange shells gathered from the Gulf Coast, colourful minerals collected in distant hills, finely woven baskets, polished stone tools, and beautifully decorated pottery. Yet objects alone are not the most valuable things changing hands. Stories travel too. Songs, marriage agreements, news of changing weather, reports about unfamiliar visitors seen hundreds of miles away. Information moves surprisingly fast. Long before newspapers or telegraphs, these gatherings connected communities across enormous distances. A traveller arriving from the eastern forest might bring word of abundant harvests. Someone from the western plains might describe unusual animal migrations or changing water conditions. Knowledge itself becomes trade. Some historians believe these exchange networks proved more organized than early European observers fully appreciated. Others argue local independence remained stronger than regional coordination. Like many aspects of early Texas history, the evidence leaves room for thoughtful disagreement. The uncertainty adds quiet richness. History does not always offer perfect certainty. It offers possibilities. You notice several Spanish-made metal knives resting beside beautifully crafted stone tools. Neither has completely replaced the other. Practicality guides decisions. Iron cuts efficiently. Stone remains easier to produce locally. Communities adapt selectively, choosing innovations that improve daily life while preserving traditions that continue serving them well. Change rarely happens overnight. It arrives gently, much like this morning. Nearby, an elderly storyteller gathers several children beneath the shade of an enormous oak. His voice rises and falls softly as he points toward distant hills shimmering beneath the afternoon haze. You cannot understand every word, yet the children certainly can. They listen with complete attention. Occasionally laughter interrupts the story before everyone settles into quiet concentration once again. Perhaps he is explaining why a river bends where it does, perhaps describing ancestors who first discovered these trails, or perhaps reminding young listeners that every landscape carries responsibilities as well as gifts. Stories build maps inside the mind, maps no rainstorm can erase. As the afternoon breeze strengthens, clouds begin forming above the western horizon. Their broad shadows drift slowly across the prairie, bringing brief moments of cool relief before sunlight returns once more. Everything moves patiently. The land seems almost unwilling to hurry. You realize that history often favors dramatic events because they appear easier to remember. Battles, revolutions, and famous leaders dominate countless books. Yet most human lives unfold differently. They unfold through ordinary mornings, shared meals, long walks, patient teaching, quiet cooperation. That forgotten rhythm shaped Texas for thousands of years before later conflicts captured the world's attention. The so-called empty map was never empty. It simply failed to recognize what already existed. As evening begins approaching once more, you continue following one of the ancient trails stretching beyond the river. The path disappears gently into rolling hills glowing beneath the lowering sun. Ahead lies another frontier, another people, another story waiting patiently beneath the vast Texas sky. And somewhere beyond those distant ridges, isolated Spanish forts struggle to survive at the edge of an immense world that refuses to become simple. The prairie whispers softly around you. Its oldest roads remain beneath your feet, waiting, as they always have. Section 7. The first light of dawn spreads quietly across the frontier. Soft gold washes over the limestone hills while a thin veil of mist lingers in the valleys below. The Presidio behind you is already beginning to stir. A rooster announces the morning with great confidence as though it alone has persuaded the sun to rise. Soldiers emerge from their quarters rubbing sleepy eyes, and somewhere inside the stone walls a cook stirs a pot of beans that has simmered gently through the night. The smell is comforting. Wood smoke drifts lazily into the cool air, blending with the scent of damp earth and crushed sage beneath your boots. You pause for a moment to watch the eastern sky brighten, then continue your journey farther toward the Gulf Coast. Today your path follows one of the stranger stories in Texas history. It begins not with Spain, but with France. Most people remember Texas as a land shaped by Spain, Mexico, and eventually the United States. Yet for a brief moment in the late 17th century, another European kingdom dreamed of claiming this distant frontier. The dream would not last. Its consequences, however, certainly would. As the morning grows warmer, you imagine yourself standing aboard a wooden sailing ship crossing the restless Atlantic Ocean during the winter of 1684. The vessel creaks constantly. Its sails snap sharply in the wind. Salt spray dampens every rope and plank, leaving the entire ship smelling of seawater, tar-damp timber, and smoke from the tiny cooking fire struggling below deck. Life aboard is uncomfortable. Space is limited. Fresh water grows stale. Bread hardens into something requiring remarkable optimism to chew. Yet spirits remain surprisingly hopeful. Leading the expedition is the ambitious French explorer René Robert Cavelier, better known as Sieur de La Salle. Already famous for exploring the Mississippi River, he dreams of establishing a French colony near its mouth. Such a settlement would strengthen French influence across North America, while challenging Spain's vast territorial claims. It is an ambitious plan, perhaps too ambitious. Navigation during the 17th century remains far from precise. Captains estimate longitude with frustrating uncertainty, relying upon imperfect instruments, changing weather, and educated guesswork. The Gulf of Mexico offers little forgiveness. Historians generally agree that La Salle's expedition missed the mouth of the Mississippi by hundreds of miles. Instead of reaching present-day Louisiana, the fleet sailed westward and unknowingly entered Matagorda Bay along the Texas coast. One navigational mistake, one enormous historical consequence. You leave the imagined ship behind as your journey carries you toward that quiet stretch of coastline. The landscape changes gradually. The rocky hills give way to broad coastal prairies where tall grasses ripple endlessly beneath the breeze. Marshes spread toward the horizon, alive with white egrets, herons, and countless waterfowl. The salty scent of the Gulf rides inland with every gentle wind. The air feels different here, more humid, warmer, filled with the distant cries of gulls circling above the shoreline. You finally reach the bay itself. The water lies calm beneath the morning sun, its surface reflecting soft patches of drifting cloud. Small waves lap quietly against sandy beaches scattered with shells polished smooth by years of gentle tides. It appears peaceful, almost welcoming, yet this beautiful place will soon become the setting for one of colonial North America's greatest failures. The French establish a small settlement that becomes known as Fort St. Louis. Calling it a fort requires generosity. The colony consists of a handful of rough wooden buildings surrounded by a simple defensive wall. Supplies are limited from the beginning. Disease spreads easily. Hunting proves unpredictable. Communication with France becomes nearly impossible. Isolation settles over the settlement, like a heavy blanket. The colonists work tirelessly. Some repair leaking roofs damaged by Gulf storms. Others fish the nearby waters or search for edible plants along the marshes. Carpenters cut timber beneath relentless summer heat, while blacksmiths struggle to keep tools functional, despite limited materials. Every task feels urgent. Nothing comes easily. You walk quietly among the settlement as though no one notices your presence. Children chase one another between unfinished cabins, laughing, despite difficult circumstances. A woman hangs damp clothing upon a line stretched between two weathered posts. Nearby, several men unload barrels from a damaged boat, carefully inspecting each one in hopes that food has survived the voyage. Hope remains valuable, perhaps more valuable than supplies. Just go. Relations with nearby indigenous communities begin cautiously. Some encounters involve peaceful trade. Others are marked by misunderstanding and growing suspicion. As with nearly every colonial frontier, no single experience defines them all. Individual personalities, local circumstances, and semi-script chance shape each meeting in different ways. History rarely follows a script. It improvises constantly. Researchers continued debating precisely how events unfolded during several key moments of the colony's short existence. Contemporary accounts sometimes contradict one another, while later retellings often added dramatic details that remain difficult to verify. The uncertainty has endured for centuries, even so the broader picture is clear. The colony struggles from the very beginning. One ship runs aground, another returns to France. Disease weakens it. Food shortages become increasingly common. Then comes another blow. La Salle himself repeatedly leaves the settlement searching for the Mississippi River he still believes lies somewhere nearby. Each expedition ends in disappointment. The Texas landscape proves enormous. Its rivers resemble one another. Its distances deceive even experienced travelers. You follow one of those expeditions inland. Days become weeks. Weeks stretch into months. The travelers cross rivers swollen by spring rains, dense forests humming with insects, and open prairies where buffalo graze beneath endless skies. The scenery remains breathtaking. The journey does not. Heat exhausts everyone. Mosquitoes arrive in relentless clouds near wetlands. Boots wear thin. Food grows scarce. Even optimism begins showing signs of fatigue. One evening, the camp settles beneath a stand of oak trees. A fire crackles softly. The smell of roasting game drifts into the cool night air, while tired men quietly repair clothing and sharpen knives beneath starlight. No one speaks very much. Weariness has become its own language. Eventually, internal disagreements fracture the expedition. In 1687, La Salle is killed by members of his own party during a dispute far from the struggling colony. It is a remarkably quiet ending for such an ambitious dream. No dramatic battlefield, no grand final speech, only tension, exhaustion, and tragic human conflict. Back at Fort St. Louis, the remaining settlers continue facing impossible odds. Within only a few years, the colony disappears. Some settlers die from illness and hardship. Others are killed during conflicts. A handful of children survive after being adopted into local indigenous communities where they grow up speaking different languages and living entirely different lives than anyone in France had imagined. History sometimes takes unexpected turns. The colony itself vanishes. Its influence does not. When news eventually reaches Spanish authorities that the French attempted to establish a settlement in Texas, alarm spreads quickly across New Spain. Spain suddenly realizes its northern frontier appears far more vulnerable than previously believed. Officials respond decisively. More expeditions follow. Additional missions are founded. New presidios are constructed. Resources once directed elsewhere now begin flowing into Texas. Ironically, the failed French colony helps encourage greater Spanish settlement across the region. Failure changes history, sometimes more than success. As afternoon sunlight dances across the calm waters of Matagorda Bay, you stand quietly where Fort St. Louis once struggled to survive. Little remains today. Wind moves gently through tall coastal grasses. Pelicans glide low above the waves. Tiny crabs disappear into the sand as the tide slowly advances. Nature has reclaimed nearly everything. Only scattered archaeological discoveries and careful historical research allow us to reconstruct this forgotten chapter. Even archaeologists continue debating the precise location of some buildings and the sequence of certain events. The Gulf Coast changes constantly through storms, erosion, and shifting shore lines, making the search surprisingly difficult. The land keeps some secrets. Perhaps it always will. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, you leave the quiet bay behind. The salty breeze follows you inland for a while before gradually giving way once again to the familiar scents of prairie grass, cedar, and warm earth. Ahead lies another transformation, one carried not by ships, but by horses. Soon the vast plains of Texas will belong to riders whose skill will astonish both friend and foe alike. The evening sky deepens into shades of amber and violet. Your footsteps remain unhurried. History continues at the pace of the setting sun. Section 8. The morning arrives beneath a sky so wide that it seems to stretch beyond imagination. A gentle breeze rolls across the open prairie, sending waves through the tall grass like ripples across a quiet lake. Dew sparkles on every stem before the rising sun slowly transforms each droplet into invisible mist. The air smells wonderfully fresh, carrying traces of wildflowers, sage, and the faint sweetness of buffalo grass warming beneath the first golden light. You leave the Gulf Coast behind. With every mile westward, the landscape opens even farther. Forests become less frequent. Rivers spread farther apart. The horizon grows so distant that earth and sky seem to blend together in soft shades of blue. Here space itself feels alive. It is easy to understand why so many later travelers describe these plains with a mixture of admiration and humility. There is nowhere to hide from the wind, nowhere to ignore the changing weather. Every storm can be seen hours before it arrives, drifting steadily across the immense Texas sky. The land teaches patience. It also teaches awareness. As the morning unfolds, you begin noticing fresh hoofprints crossing the prairie. Not just one or two, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Some have belonged to wild mustangs descended from horses introduced by the Spanish generations earlier. Others belong to riders whose skill has become legendary throughout North America. You are entering Comanche country. For nearly 2 centuries, the Comanche would become one of the most powerful peoples on the Great Plains. Their mastery of horses transformed not only their own society, but the entire balance of power across the region. It was an extraordinary adaptation. Few cultures in history embraced a new animal so completely or so quickly. Historians generally believe the Comanche emerged as a distinct people during the late 17th and early 18th centuries after separating from the Shoshone farther north. As horses spread southward from Spanish settlements, they recognized an opportunity unlike anything previous generations had imagined. The horse changed everything. Travel became faster. Hunting became more effective. Trade expanded dramatically. Entire communities could move with remarkable speed across enormous distances. You continue walking until you hear a distant sound carried by the wind. Hooves. Soft at first, then growing steadily louder. Soon several riders appear upon a nearby ridge. They move with astonishing confidence. The horses seem almost like extensions of their riders rather than separate animals. Men, women, and even young children ride with remarkable balance, guiding their mounts using subtle movements that barely seem visible. The partnership appears effortless. yet it represents years of practice beginning almost from childhood. European visitors often wrote with amazement about Comanche horsemanship. Some claimed riders could lean completely from the side of a galloping horse using the animal's body as protection, while remaining nearly invisible. Exactly how common such remarkable techniques became remains a subject of discussion among historians. Some contemporary accounts may have exaggerated, others likely underestimated what they witnessed. Whatever the precise details, no one questioned the extraordinary skill these riders possessed. You stop beside a shallow stream where several families have gathered. Dozens of horses graze peacefully nearby, watched carefully by young boys not much older than 8 or 9 years old. Already they handle the animals confidently. Learning begins early. A little girl gently brushes the mane of a young mare while speaking softly to her. Nearby, an older rider patiently demonstrates how to braid rawhide reins strong enough to withstand long journeys across the plains. Every movement carries purpose. Nothing is rushed. The smell of horses fills the air, mingling with fresh grass and smoke rising from nearby cooking fires. Buffalo hides dry upon wooden frames while strips of meat slowly cure in the warm morning breeze. Life revolves around movement, yet it never feels chaotic. The buffalo, more than any other animal, shapes daily existence. Vast herds still roam the Great Plains during this period, darkening entire hillsides when viewed from a distance. They provide food, clothing, shelter, coverings, tools, sewing, thread containers, and countless other necessities. Almost every part serves a purpose. Bones become scrapers and needles. Sinew becomes cord. Hides become warm lodges capable of being assembled or dismantled with impressive efficiency. Nothing is discarded carelessly. European observers sometimes misunderstood this mobile lifestyle, assuming permanent stone buildings represented civilization, while portable homes suggested something less sophisticated. The opposite was often true. The Comanche understood that mobility itself created strength. Why construct heavy structures when the resources you depend upon move across hundreds of miles? Adaptation becomes wisdom, not compromise. As the sun climbs higher, you ride alongside several hunters preparing for a buffalo expedition. Before departure, an elder quietly offers words of encouragement rather than dramatic speeches. Young riders check their bows, examine saddle straps, and gently reassure nervous horses. Preparation matters more than excitement. Every hunter understands that success depends upon patience, cooperation, and careful observation. The hunt begins. The riders spread gradually across the prairie rather than charging immediately. Wind direction matters. Terrain matters. The behavior of the herd matters. Everything requires attention. When the moment finally arrives, the horses accelerate with astonishing speed. Dust rises behind them in great rolling clouds. The thunder of hooves vibrates gently through the ground beneath your feet. Arrows fly with remarkable accuracy. Within only a few minutes, the hunt is complete. No unnecessary suffering, no wasteful excess, only enough for animals to support the community. Historians generally agree that buffalo hunting demanded extraordinary coordination and skill long before firearms became widespread across the plains. Although later generations often associate plains cultures with rifles, bows remained highly effective hunting tools for many decades. The quiet efficiency impresses you. Back at camp, work begins immediately. Meat is carefully prepared for drying. Hides are cleaned and stretched. Children carry water from a nearby stream. Older women oversee much of the processing, with practiced confidence directing younger family members through tasks refined over generations. Everyone contributes. Even the smallest hands find meaningful work. The afternoon grows warm. Grasshoppers leap through the prairie with every step. Hawks circle high overhead while distant prairie dogs whistle warnings from their burrows before disappearing underground. You sit beneath the shade of a portable lodge covered with beautifully prepared buffalo hides. Inside, the air feels noticeably cooler. Sunlight filters softly through carefully stitched seams. The faint smell of smoke lingers pleasantly from countless cooking fires that have warmed this shelter during many journeys. A storyteller begins speaking. Children gather nearby. His voice remains calm and measured as he recounts tales of ancestors, remarkable hunts, unexpected storms, and lessons carried across generations. These stories entertain. They also educate. Memory remains his strongest library. One particularly fascinating question continues occupying scholars today. Just how large did the Comanche horse herds become during their greatest period of influence? Some historical estimates suggest astonishing numbers, while others caution that early observers often exaggerated what they saw upon the seemingly endless plains. The exact figures remain uncertain. The significance does not. By the 18th century, the Comanche had established an influence so extensive that historians sometimes refer to their territory as the Comanche Empire, or Comancheria. It stretched across large portions of present-day Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, and beyond. It was not an empire built upon stone cities or royal palaces. It was built upon mobility, relationships, trade, knowledge, and horses. Spanish officials, French traders, and later American settlers all learned to respect this remarkable power. Diplomacy often proved far wiser than confrontation. The plains belonged to those who understood them. As evening approaches, the camp slowly settles. The horses return from grazing, their silhouettes glowing softly beneath the golden light of sunset. The smell of roasting buffalo drifts once more through the cool evening air, while laughter rises gently from families preparing the evening meal. Above, the first stars begin appearing, one by one, exactly as they did yesterday, exactly as they will tomorrow. You realize that history often remembers famous generals and distant governments. Yet here upon these vast plains, another kind of greatness quietly flourished. One measured not by castles, but by freedom, not by walls, but by horizons. You leave the camp with the fading light behind you. The rhythmic sound of grazing horses slowly disappears into the evening breeze. Ahead, new frontiers await, new cultures, new encounters, and another forgotten chapter waiting patiently beneath the endless Texas sky. Section 9. The dawn wind arrives before the sunlight. It slips quietly across the open plains, bending tall grasses until they shimmer like gentle waves beneath a pale blue sky. The air feels cool enough that you instinctively pull your hands closer together. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, thunder murmurs softly, although no storm has yet appeared. The prairie always notices first. Long before people see dark clouds, the birds alter their songs. Horses lift their heads from grazing, buffalo shift direction almost imperceptibly. Even the scent of the air changes, carrying a faint trace of distant rain mixed with dry sage and warm earth. You have begun to recognize these quiet conversations. The land speaks constantly. Today your journey follows neither a Spanish road nor a Comanche hunting trail. Instead, you enter the remarkable world between them. History often tells stories as though cultures exist in separate chapters. First come one people, then another arrives. Soon conflict begins, followed by change. Reality is rarely so tied. Most frontiers become places where worlds overlap. People meet, trade, marry, argue, laugh, learn new words, forget old assumptions. Across Texas, countless individuals quietly live between different societies. They served as interpreters, traders, scouts, guides, diplomats, craftspeople, and messengers. Some were born into families with parents from different cultural backgrounds. Others gradually learned new languages through years of travel and friendship. They became bridges. Although history books rarely celebrate them as loudly as generals or governors, their influence reached surprisingly far. You follow a winding trail toward a broad river crossing, where several trading camps have gathered beneath enormous cottonwood trees. Their leaves shimmer silver green whenever the breeze passes through, producing a soft, rustling sound, almost like whispered conversation. The river moves slowly here. Its surface reflects the morning sky so perfectly that clouds appear to drift beneath your feet. Several canoes rest along the muddy bank. Nearby horses graze peacefully beside mules carrying heavy packs filled with trade goods. The smell of leather wood smoke, drying hides, and fresh river water blends into an atmosphere that feels both busy and wonderfully calm. Voices surround you. Not one language, several. Spanish, different indigenous languages, perhaps fragments of French, occasionally all within the same conversation. A middle-aged trader greets newcomers with effortless ease, shifting naturally from one language to another. His pronunciation changes with remarkable confidence. His gestures become slightly different depending upon whom he addresses. You realize he has spent years mastering something more valuable than gold: trust. Interpreters occupied extraordinarily important positions throughout colonial Texas. Diplomatic meetings, trade agreements, peace negotiations, and even everyday conversations often depended upon individuals capable of navigating multiple cultures. Translation involved much more than vocabulary. Words rarely carry identical meanings across different societies. A simple greeting in one culture might require careful explanation in another. Concepts involving land ownership, leadership, spirituality, or family sometimes possessed no exact equivalent at all. Understanding required patience. Not merely language. Historians generally agree that many frontier negotiations succeeded because experienced interpreters recognized these subtle differences. Yet scholars also acknowledge that misunderstandings inevitably occurred, despite everyone's best efforts. Sometimes one missing nuance changed everything. You wander through the trading camp, An elderly Caddo artisan carefully displays beautifully woven baskets beside polished pottery decorated with elegant geometric patterns. Nearby Comanche traders inspect Spanish metal tools while discussing the quality of recently acquired horses. Across the clearing, a Spanish merchant unwraps bolts of brightly coloured cloth from Mexico. Children drift curiously between every stall. They seem wonderfully uninterested in political boundaries. To them, today's gathering simply feels exciting. The smell of roasting fish drifts from one fire. Fresh corn cakes bake upon heated stones nearby. Someone prepares a stew seasoned with local herbs unfamiliar to European kitchens, but long appreciated throughout the region. History often arrives through recipes. Foods travel surprisingly well. Corn cultivated by indigenous farmers now appears regularly upon Spanish tables. European livestock gradually reshape local diets. New spices mingle with older cooking traditions. Cultures quietly borrow from one another, one meal at a time. Near the riverbank, you notice two women laughing together while washing clothing. One wears a traditional deerskin dress decorated with delicate beadwork. The other wears a linen blouse stitched in European fashion. Their children play together without hesitation. One little boy happily switches between two languages during a single sentence. Perhaps tomorrow he will learn a third. Many frontier families lived remarkably blended lives. Marriages between different communities occurred more frequently than simplified historical narratives sometimes suggest. Their descendants often inherited rich mixtures of language, customs, practical knowledge, and identity. Life refused simple categories. The afternoon breeze grows warmer. Dragonflies skim gracefully above the river, while turtles bask upon fallen logs. You dip your hand into the cool water, feeling its gentle current continue southward towards the Gulf of Mexico. Rivers connect everyone, long before governments attempt to divide them. A respected elder invites several travelers beneath the shade of a cottonwood. No formal courtroom appears, no elaborate ceremony. Instead, people sit quietly in a wide circle while discussing safe travel routes, recent weather-wandering buffalo herds, and rumors of unfamiliar visitors seen farther west. Diplomacy often begins this simply, with listening. Historians continued debating exactly how extensive these informal diplomatic networks became across early Texas. Written Spanish records naturally emphasize official treaties, while indigenous oral traditions often preserve different perspectives, emphasizing personal relationships rather than signed agreements. Perhaps both capture part of the truth. Human cooperation rarely depends entirely upon documents. As afternoon sunlight filters gently through fluttering leaves, you notice a young interpreter helping two groups settle a disagreement over several horses. He speaks calmly, never raising his voice. Occasionally he pauses before choosing exactly the right phrase. Everyone waits patiently. No one seems offended by the silence. Sometimes silence itself communicates respect. Eventually smiles appear. Hands are extended. The discussion ends peacefully. No one applauds. Successful diplomacy often leaves little drama behind, only ordinary life continuing. One curious story occasionally appears in frontier accounts. Several travelers described interpreters who could imitate regional accents so perfectly that listeners immediately felt more comfortable speaking with them. Whether every tale is entirely accurate remains uncertain. Historians still debate how much later storytellers embellished these remarkable abilities. Even so, the importance of trust itself remains beyond question. As the sun begins descending toward the western horizon, musicians gather near one of the larger fires. A simple wooden flute begins playing. Someone quietly joins with a hand drum. Soon soft singing rises into the warm evening air. The melodies sound unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Music crosses boundaries easily, perhaps more easily than words. Nearby, an elderly Spanish traveler smiles while listening. A Comanche child gently sways with the rhythm. Several Caddo women continue weaving baskets without missing a stitch. For one peaceful evening, differences remain present, but not divisive. History often remembers moments when cultures collided. It remembers battles, broken treaties, territorial disputes. Those events certainly shaped Texas, yet quieter moments like this shaped it too. Shared laughter, honest trade, mutual curiosity, children learning several languages before adulthood, families discovering that cooperation frequently proved more practical than suspicion. The frontier was never merely a dividing line. It was also a meeting place. The first stars gradually appear above the river. Cooking fires glow warmly beneath towering cottonwoods whose leaves now whisper gently in the cool evening breeze. The smell of cedar smoke rises slowly toward the darkening sky. You prepare to continue west tomorrow. Beyond these peaceful trading grounds, new challenges already gather upon the horizon. Powerful nations continue expanding. European ambitions continue growing. Texas itself continues changing. But tonight, beside this quiet river, you have witnessed another forgotten truth. History is not built only by conquerors. It is also built by translators, by traders, by families, by patient listeners willing to help strangers understand one another. The river flows steadily through the darkness, carrying every story with it, toward tomorrow. Section 10. Morning arrives beneath a sky brushed with long ribbons of pink and pale gold. The river you have followed for so many days now disappears behind rolling hills, while a fresh breeze carries the earthy fragrance of damp grass and blooming prickly pear. A mockingbird begins its astonishing performance from the branch of a live oak, borrowing songs from half a dozen other birds before inventing a few melodies of its own. Even nature seems comfortable blending traditions here. You smile quietly and continue southward. The peaceful trading camp has faded into memory, but the conversations you heard there linger in your thoughts. Languages mixed as naturally as streams joining a river. Families carried customs from several cultures without seeing any contradiction. The frontier, you realize, is not simply a place on a map. It is a place where identities evolve. That quiet truth becomes even more important as the story moves into the early 19th century. The great empires that once seemed permanent are beginning to shift beneath everyone's feet. Far away in Europe, wars reshape kingdoms. Across the Atlantic, revolutions alter governments. And in New Spain, the vast Spanish colony that has ruled Texas for generations is approaching one of the greatest transformations in its history. Few people living ordinary lives fully understand what is coming. Most are too busy harvesting crops, repairing roofs, looking after children, preparing supper before sunset. History often changes while people are occupied with everyday life. You climb a gentle ridge overlooking a broad valley. Below, a small settlement rests beside a winding creek. Adobe homes stand beside wooden cabins. A mission church rises modestly above the surrounding buildings while cattle graze peacefully beyond simple fences. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. The smell of fresh tortillas drifts through the cool morning air. Somewhere nearby, a carpenter shapes cedar planks with slow rhythmic strokes. The village appears wonderfully ordinary, yet beneath its calm surface uncertainty quietly grows. For more than 300 years, Spain claimed enormous territories across North America, including Texas. Maintaining authority over such vast distances had never been easy, but by the early 1800s, pressures were increasing from many directions. Trade slowed, government resources stretched thin. Communication with distant officials often required months. Meanwhile, revolutionary ideas travelled far more quickly than official orders. The winds of change ignored borders. In 1810, the Mexican War of Independence began. Although many of the earliest battles occurred far south of Texas, the conflict gradually affected even these remote frontier communities. Soldiers were reassigned, supplies became less reliable, rumours spread faster than confirmed news. No one seemed entirely certain what tomorrow might bring. You enter the village marketplace. It is smaller than those you visited earlier, yet filled with quiet activity. Farmers unload baskets of corn, squash, peppers and beans. A rancher carefully examines a new saddle while discussing prices with a leather worker. Children weave between the market stalls, chasing one another with cheerful determination. Life continues. Despite politics, an elderly merchant shakes his head while counting a handful of silver coins. The government changes, he mutters to no one in particular. But people still need shoes. His quiet observation feels timeless. Historians generally agree that many residents of frontier Texas experienced the independence movement less through dramatic battles than through gradual disruptions to ordinary routines. Mail arrived less predictably. Military patrols changed. Taxes shifted. Trade patterns became uncertain. For most families, survival remained the immediate concern, not distant political philosophy. You continue toward the edge of the settlement where several vaqueros are preparing horses. The word may sound familiar. Long before the English word cowboy became famous, the Spanish and Mexican vaqueros had already developed many of the riding techniques, tools, and livestock practices that later generations would associate with the American West. Leather chaps, the lariat, the saddle horn, even many ranching terms still spoken today trace their origins to Spanish. History often borrows quietly, without asking permission. You watch as one experienced vaquero demonstrates rope work to a younger rider. His movements are smooth and unhurried. The loop sails gracefully through the morning air before settling perfectly over a wooden post several yards away. He smiles modestly, then tries again. Skill grows through repetition, not spectacle. Nearby, several women prepare cheese from fresh milk while others grind corn using stone metates polished smooth by decades of daily use. The familiar scraping sound blends gently with birdsong and the occasional lowing of cattle grazing beyond the village. Everything feels peaceful. Yet visitors arriving from the south carry troubling news. Fighting continues. Different leaders claim authority. Loyalties become increasingly complicated. Some settlers remain devoted to Spain. Others quietly support independence. Many simply hope whichever government emerges will leave them enough peace to raise their families. Choosing sides is rarely simple, especially on the frontier. One fascinating historical uncertainty concerns exactly how strongly the independence movement was supported within different parts of Texas during its earliest years. Some scholars argue enthusiasm remained limited outside certain communities. Others believe many frontier residents sympathized privately while avoiding open commitment until circumstances became clearer. The surviving records rarely tell the complete story. Silence leaves historians guessing. By 1821, after more than a decade of conflict, Mexico finally secured independence from Spain. Without a single battle occurring in your quiet village today, everything changes. Texas is no longer Spanish. It has become part of a new nation. The transition feels almost strangely gentle. No magical sunrise announces it. No mountain echoes with triumphant speeches. Instead, a new flag gradually replaces an old one. Officials receive different instructions. Documents bear new seals. Ordinary people continue planting crops because corn refuses to wait for political ceremonies. History turns quietly, more often than we imagine. The new Mexican government inherits an enormous challenge. Texas remains vast. Its population remains relatively small. Its northern frontier continues difficult to defend. Leaders in Mexico City begin searching for practical solutions. One idea appears increasingly attractive: encourage more settlers to move into Texas. At first, the proposal seemed sensible. More families could establish farms, more communities could strengthen the frontier, more economic activity could benefit everyone. Few people foresee how profoundly this decision will reshape the future. You walk beyond the village into broad grazing lands where cattle wander beneath scattered oak trees. The afternoon sun warms your shoulders while a gentle breeze carries the scent of fresh grass and distant wildflowers. A young rancher points toward the horizon. More families are coming, he says quietly. He sounds hopeful. He also sounds uncertain. Neither feeling is misplaced. As evening approaches, the settlement grows calm once more. Smoke rises from cooking fires. The aroma of beef stew, roasted peppers, and fresh bread drifts lazily through the cooling air. Children gather around grandparents, eager for another stay before bedtime. Dogs curl beside front doors. Lanterns begin glowing softly behind small windows. Life remains beautifully ordinary. That ordinary life is precisely what makes history so remarkable. Governments rise, empires fade, borders shift. Yet families still gather around evening meals. Neighbors still borrow tools. Someone still pauses to admire the colors of the sunset. You stand quietly upon the ridge overlooking the village one final time. Below, the first lights flicker against the growing darkness. Far beyond the horizon, new settlers are already preparing journeys toward Texas. Some travel with dreams of fertile land. Others seek opportunity after difficult years elsewhere. Their arrival will bring hope. It will also bring tension. The story is about to become far more complicated. The stars appear one by one above the peaceful valley. The wind grows cooler, and somewhere beyond the darkness, another forgotten chapter patiently waits for the coming dawn. Section 11. The sun has not yet climbed above the eastern hills when you begin walking again. A thin blanket of morning fog rests across the prairie, softening the outlines of distant oak groves and winding creeks. Every blade of grass glistens with dew. The cool air carries the familiar scent of cedar-damp soil and wood smoke drifting from scattered homesteads that have begun to appear more frequently across the Texas landscape. The frontier is changing, not suddenly, but steadily. Only a generation ago, these rolling plains were home to relatively small settlements separated by enormous distances. Now new cabins appear beside rivers that had flowed quietly for thousands of years. Fresh fences divide open meadows. Fields of corn and cotton stretch farther each season. The land itself has not changed. The people upon it have. Following Mexico's independence from Spain in 1821, the new government inherited a difficult problem. Texas remained immense, lightly populated, and vulnerable to raids from several directions. Leaders in Mexico City hoped additional settlers would strengthen the northern frontier while encouraging economic growth. It seemed like a practical solution, at least at first, to attract newcomers. Mexico adopted the impresario system. Under this arrangement, individuals received permission to recruit families willing to settle in Texas. In return, these empresarios received grants of land while the settlers gained opportunities that would have seemed impossible elsewhere. One name soon became especially important: Stephen F. Austin, often remembered as the father of Texas. Austin did not begin his work by imagining an independent republic. His original goal was far simpler. He hoped to establish successful farming communities operating peacefully under Mexican law. History sometimes enjoys irony. The people who set events in motion rarely predict where those events will end. You follow a dusty road lined with newly planted pecan trees. Ahead, a cluster of cabins sits beside a slow-moving river. Smoke curls gently from stone chimneys while chickens wander confidently between split-rail fences. The settlement feels hopeful. Freshly cut timber still perfumes the morning air. A young couple works together raising the walls of a new barn. Their neighbours arrive carrying extra tools without needing to be asked. On the frontier, cooperation often outweighs competition. Building a house rarely becomes a one-person project. Families gather. Neighbours lend hands. Children carry smaller pieces of lumber with great determination despite contributing more enthusiasm than strength. By sunset, another roof stands beneath the Texas sky. That quiet generosity becomes one of the defining features of frontier life. You continue toward a nearby field where rows of corn sway gently beneath the strengthening breeze. A farmer wipes perspiration from his forehead before offering you a friendly smile. His accent reveals roots somewhere in the American South. Nearby, another family speaks Spanish. Farther down the road, you hear French. Several indigenous traders arrive with bundles of hides for exchange. The settlement resembles yesterday's trading camp in one important way. Many cultures still meet here, only now the population is growing more rapidly than ever before. Between 1821 and the early 1830s, thousands of settlers arrived in Mexican Texas. Many traveled with wagons carrying furniture, farming tools, seed, livestock, and children too young to appreciate the extraordinary journey unfolding around them. Most came seeking opportunity, rich farmland, fresh beginnings, room to build something lasting. The rich black soil certainly encouraged optimism. You kneel beside one freshly ploughed field. The earth feels soft and fertile between your fingers. Its scent rises warmly beneath the midday sun. Nearby oxen pull a wooden plough while birds eagerly follow behind, collecting insects exposed by the freshly turned ground. Everything suggests abundance, yet beneath that promise, small misunderstandings quietly multiply. Many newcomers arrive from the United States bringing customs, legal expectations, languages and religious traditions shaped by different experiences than those of Mexican officials. Neither side initially expected serious conflict. Both assumed practical cooperation would prevail. Reality proved more complicated. One issue involved language, another involved legal traditions. Religion created additional differences. Mexico officially recognized Roman Catholicism as the national faith, and settlers formally agreed to respect that requirement. In practice, however, religious observance varied considerably across the growing frontier. Daily survival usually demanded greater attention than theological debates. Historians generally agree that most early settlers focused primarily upon building farms and supporting their families rather than deliberately challenging Mexican authority. At the same time, Mexican leaders increasingly worried that the rapidly growing Anglo population might someday become difficult to govern. Those concerns were understandable. Population changes happened quickly. You stop beside a small general store where several ranchers discuss recent news over cups of coffee. The aroma fills the shaded porch. Fresh beans have arrived from Mexico. Sugar remains expensive. Nails are difficult to obtain. One man jokes that frontier chickens somehow know exactly when someone has planted a garden. Everyone laughs. Life continues through all the ordinary conversations. A travelling merchant spreads colourful cloth across a wooden table while children examine shiny metal buttons with enormous fascination. Nearby, a blacksmith shoes a restless horse whose impatient snorts occasionally interrupt the peaceful afternoon. The settlement feels alive. Not wealthy, simply busy. Beyond the village, cattle graze across open pasture. The ranching traditions introduced during Spanish and Mexican rule continue expanding. Vaqueros ride effortlessly among the herds, demonstrating skills refined over generations. Many newly arrived settlers eagerly adopt these techniques. They quickly discover that Texas teaches everyone, regardless of where they were born. The afternoon grows warmer. A soft breeze carries the sweet scent of blooming prickly pear flowers mixed with the earthy smell of livestock and freshly cut hay drying beneath the sun. You hear laughter coming from the riverbank. Several children are skipping smooth stones across the water. One boasts proudly after achieving 5 perfect skips. Another insists it was actually 6. Some arguments never require historians. Not every conversation remains so light-hearted. Inside the settlement's meeting hall, several community leaders quietly discuss recent political changes in Mexico. New laws, changing immigration policies, questions about local government. Rumors spread almost as quickly as sex. Exactly how concerned frontier residents became during these early years remains a topic of scholarly discussion. Some historians argue tensions developed gradually through practical disagreements. Others emphasize deeper cultural differences that made conflict increasingly likely regardless of individual intentions. Perhaps history contains elements of both. Simple explanations rarely survive close examination. In 1830, the Mexican government passed legislation limiting further immigration from the United States while strengthening military oversight in Texas. Officials hoped these measures would restore balance. Many settlers interpreted them differently. They worried opportunities might disappear. Mutual suspicion slowly replaced earlier optimism. No single argument caused the change. Instead, countless small frustrations accumulated, like tiny stones gradually filling a wagon until its wheels begin to strain beneath the weight. Even then, most people still hoped compromise remained possible. Farmers continued planting crops. Merchants continued trading. Children continued learning to read. Life refused to pause while politicians debated. As evening settles across the prairie, golden sunlight washes gently over fields that only recently emerged from untouched grassland. Crickets begin their nightly chorus. The smell of sapar drifts from every cabin. Cornbread bakes inside cast-iron oven. Stew simmers slowly above open fires. Families gather around rough wooden tables built with patient hands. You realize something important. Almost everyone here believes they are building a better future. Mexican officials hope to secure their northern frontier. Settlers hope to create prosperous homes. Vaqueros continue caring for cattle as generations before them had done. Indigenous communities strive to protect lands and traditions that have sustained them for centuries. Their goals increasingly overlap. Their interests increasingly collide. None of them can yet see exactly where the road leads. The stars gradually appear above the quiet settlement. Lanterns glow softly behind cabin windows. A dog barks once before settling beside the porch. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day. Ploughing, trading, repairing fences, watching children grow. And somewhere beyond the horizon, larger events continue gathering strength like distant thunder, still hidden beyond the rolling hills. The breeze cools. The prairie grows quiet. History takes another careful step forward. Section 12. The morning begins beneath a sky washed with soft lavender and pale gold. A gentle breeze stirs the tall prairie grass, carrying the rich scent of damp earth after a light shower during the night. Water droplets cling to the branches of sprawling live oaks, occasionally falling with quiet taps onto the leaves below. Somewhere in the distance, a flock of wild turkeys wanders through the undergrowth, while a red-tailed hawk circles patiently above the awakening countryside. The land seems wonderfully peaceful. It's almost difficult to imagine that this same landscape will soon become one of the most remembered places in American history. Not because of its quiet mornings, but because of a handful of dramatic days. You continue along a dusty road leading toward the small settlement of San Antonio de Bexar. Unlike the isolated ranches and farming communities you have recently visited, this town carries centuries of history. Spanish missionaries, soldiers, merchants, indigenous families, and Mexican citizens have all left their marks upon its streets. Its buildings feel familiar. Its future does not. As you approach, church bells ring softly through the cool morning air. Their echoes drift across limestone walls warmed by the first sunlight. The smell of fresh bread escapes from a nearby bakery, blending with roasting peppers, wood smoke, and the earthy fragrance of horses waiting patiently beside watering troughs. Daily life continues. Shopkeepers sweep dusty doorsteps. Children hurry toward lessons. Women carry woven baskets filled with vegetables gathered from nearby gardens. A blacksmith begins another day, each measured strike of his hammer echoing steadily through the town. No one knows exactly how history will remember this place. That uncertainty feels strangely comforting. The Texas Revolution is often reduced to a single phrase. Remember the Alamo. Those words became enormously powerful. Yet they also simplified a far more complicated story. Today you will step beyond the familiar legend. You walk toward the old mission known as the Alamo. Long before it became famous as a battlefield, it served as a Franciscan mission established in the early 18th century. Indigenous families lived and worked here. Crops were cultivated nearby. Religious services filled the chapel. Children learned practical skills within its walls. Its first purpose was never war. History gave it another role. By the 1830s, tensions between the Mexican government and many Texas settlers had grown steadily. Political disagreements, constitutional questions, immigration policies, and differing visions for Texas all contributed to an increasingly uncertain atmosphere. No single issue explains everything. Historians continued debating the relative importance of each factor. Some emphasize federalism and constitutional rights. Others point toward economic concerns, local autonomy, cultural differences, or the expanding institution of slavery. The causes remain layered, just like the people themselves. As you wander through the mission courtyard, the air feels cool beneath thick stone walls. Swallows dart gracefully overhead, building nests beneath the old roof beams. The scent of limestone mingles with fresh rain lingering upon the ground. You pause. is remarkably quiet, perhaps quieter than expected. Popular imagination often fills the Alamo with non-stop action, dramatic speeches and heroic gestures unfolding every moment. Reality included long hours of waiting, repairing defenses, sharing meals, cleaning weapons, writing letters home. Ordinary routine survived even during extraordinary circumstances. In February 1836, a relatively small group of Texian defenders occupied the Alamo, while a much larger Mexican army under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna advanced towards San Antonio. The imbalance was obvious. The outcome remained uncertain. You imagine the defenders beginning another morning inside the old mission. Someone stirs a pot of coffee. Another patches worn clothing beside a small fire. Several men inspect damaged walls, strengthened as best they can with available materials. Outside, horses graze quietly in the fading mist. Inside, conversations remain surprisingly calm. People laugh occasionally. Someone tells a familiar story from home. Another quietly sharpens a knife whose edge probably needs no further attention. Waiting occupies much of military life. The senses become unusually sharp during quiet moments. You notice the smell of gunpowder lingering faintly from previous practice. Leather saddles creak softly whenever someone shifts position. The rough stone beneath your fingertips feels cool despite the warming day. From somewhere beyond the walls comes the distant sound of birds continuing entirely ordinary lives. Nature remains wonderfully indifferent. The siege lasts 13 days. Popular retellings often compress those days into a few dramatic scenes. In truth, they unfolded slowly. Messages arrived. Cannons fired intermittently. Defenders repaired damage each night. Sleep came in brief intervals. Food became increasingly limited. Hope rose and fell with every rumor. Historians still debate several famous episodes associated with the Alamo. Did William Barrett Travis truly draw a line in the sand, asking defenders to choose whether to remain? The story became deeply rooted in Texas tradition. Yet contemporary evidence remains limited, and scholars continue discussing when the account first appeared and how accurately it reflects actual events. The uncertainty has never diminished its symbolic power. History often lives between fact and memory. Another enduring question concerns Davy Crockett. Already famous throughout the United States before arriving in Texas, Crockett became one of the Alamo's most recognizable figures. Exactly how he died remains disputed. Some accounts suggest he fell during the final assault. Others, based upon later reports, propose he survived the fighting briefly before being executed. The available evidence supports multiple interpretations. The debate continues. You stand quietly beneath the mission's weathered walls. Perhaps the most remarkable truth is not how famous individuals behaved. It is how many ordinary people shared the experience alongside them. Farmers, craftsmen, recent immigrants, long-time residents, men whose names rarely appear in textbooks. They too waited. They too wondered whether reinforcements might arrive. The final assault begins before dawn on March 6, 1836. The darkness is broken by shouted commands, the pounding of boots and the deep thunder of artillery echoing across the sleeping town. The battle itself lasts less than 2 hours, far shorter than the long days of preparation that preceded it. The defenders are overwhelmed. The Mexican army captures the mission. The loss becomes one of the defining moments of the revolution. Yet even here, history resists simplicity. Mexican soldiers displayed courage during the assault. Texian defenders displayed extraordinary determination. Both sides suffered deeply. Neither viewed themselves as villains within their own understanding of events. That complexity often disappears beneath later mythology. Outside the mission walls, the town gradually returns to daily life. Families still need food. Merchants reopen their shops. Children continue growing. The stone buildings remain. History settles quietly into memory. News of the Alamo spreads rapidly across Texas and beyond. Its military significance remains debated by historians. Its psychological impact does not. The cry of "Remember the Alamo" soon inspires many Texian volunteers, strengthening support for the revolutionary cause in ways no one could fully measure. Stories possess remarkable power, sometimes greater than armies. As evening approaches, golden light washes gently across the old mission walls. The swallows return to their nests. A cool breeze carries the scent of blooming wildflowers through the quiet courtyard. Visitors will someday arrive from around the world. They will stand where you stand now. Some will seek heroes. Others will seek historical truth. Perhaps the wisest travelers search for both while accepting that history rarely offers perfect certainty. You leave the Alamo behind as twilight settles across San Antonio. Its silhouette gradually fades into the evening sky. Ahead, another chapter waits, one that tells not of a famous defeat, but of an unexpected victory that will reshape the future of Texas forever. The road stretches eastward beneath the first emerging stars. Your footsteps remain slow. The story continues. Section 13. The first birds begin singing before the horizon shows even the faintest hint of light. Their quiet calls drift through a grove of pecan trees, where cool morning air carries the scent of damp leaves, river water, and yesterday's campfire now reduced to pale grey ash. Above you, the last stars slowly surrender to dawn, fading one by one, until only the brightest remain. You continue east. The road is softer here, pressed smooth by wagons, horses, and countless footsteps that have passed during recent months. Every traveller seems to carry news. Some speak hopefully, others cautiously. Everyone senses that something important has changed. Not long ago, the Texas Revolution reached its astonishing conclusion at the Battle of San Jacinto. The fighting itself lasted only about 18 minutes, an extraordinary contrast to the months of uncertainty that came before it. General Sam Houston's army surprised the forces of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, securing a victory that transformed the political future of Texas. History sometimes turns quickly, almost without warning. Yet the days after great victories often prove more complicated than the battles themselves. You crest a gentle rise overlooking a broad meadow washed in soft morning sunlight. Several tents stand beside a winding creek where soldiers are quietly preparing breakfast. Smoke rises lazily into the still air, carrying the comforting aroma of coffee, cornmeal, and freshly baked biscuits. The atmosphere surprises you. There are no triumphant parades, no endless celebrations. Mostly there is exhaustion. A young soldier carefully repairs a torn boot with needle and thread. Nearby, another writes a letter home, pausing often as though uncertain how to describe everything that has happened. Victory changes many things. It does not eliminate ordinary work. You sit beside the creek where clear water slips gently around smooth stones polished over countless centuries. A pair of turtles rests upon a fallen log while dragonflies skim gracefully across the surface. Nature continues peacefully. The river seems unconcerned with politics. Following San Jacinto, Santa Anna was captured by Texian forces. His capture quickly became one of the most discussed events of the revolution because it created possibilities few had imagined only days earlier. Negotiations began almost immediately. The resulting agreements, commonly known as the Treaties of Velasco, called for the withdrawal of Mexican troops and recognized from the Texian perspective the independence of Texas. The situation, however, remained far from settled. The Mexican government later refused to recognize the treaties as permanently binding, arguing that Santa Anna had signed them while a prisoner. Historians continued discussing the legal and political significance of these agreements. Some emphasize their immediate practical importance. Others note that the larger dispute between Mexico and Texas remained unresolved for years afterward. History rarely ends with one signature. You continue towards a growing settlement where fresh timber frames rise beside older adobe buildings. The sound of hammers fills the warm morning. Children carry buckets of water. Oxen pull heavy wagons loaded with lumber. A blacksmith's steady rhythm echoes through the village as glowing iron meets polished steel. Everyone appears busy. There is an unmistakable sense of beginning again. The Republic of Texas has been born. On paper, that sounds wonderfully simple. In reality, creating an entirely new nation proves remarkably difficult. Governments require officials, courts, roads, laws, money, mail routes, reliable tax system. None of these appear overnight. A man standing beside a partially completed store laughs softly while wiping sawdust from his hands. "We've won a country," he says. "Now we have to build one." His observation feels wonderfully honest. Inside a nearby cabin, several local leaders gather around a rough wooden table covered with handwritten documents. Maps lie beside ink bottles and folded letters carried by horseback across remarkable distances. Their conversation remains calm. They discuss land claims, trade, defense, diplomatic recognition. There is far more paperwork than anyone expected. Nation building often involves ledgers, not just legends. The Republic of Texas elected Sam Houston as its first president in 1836. His leadership would help guide the young republic through its uncertain early years, balancing diplomacy, financial hardship, and continuing concerns about security. Houston understood celebration could not last forever. Practical challenges waited patiently. Outside, everyday life can new. A woman hangs freshly washed blankets beneath the bright afternoon sun. Their clean scent drifts gently through the breeze. Nearby, two boys argue cheerfully over whose fishing line caught the larger perch. One insists size matters, the other argues flavour matters more. Their grandmother smiles without taking sides. Some debates remain delightfully timeless. The Republic's population remains surprisingly small considering the vast territory it claims. Roads are rough, communication is slow. Many communities remain separated by days of difficult travel. When heavy rains arrive, rivers often become impossible to cross. When drought settles in, water itself determines every decision. Texas remains beautiful. It also remains demanding. You ride for several hours beside a group of merchants transporting cloth tools, coffee salt, and cooking pots toward frontier settlements. Their wagons creak steadily across uneven ground. Leather harnesses groan softly. The smell of horses mixes with warm dust and freshly cut cedar. Trade has become increasingly important. The new republic desperately needs economic stability. Cotton production expands. Cattle ranching grows steadily. River ports become busier. Small towns gradually develop into commercial centers, serving communities scattered across enormous distances. Yet prosperity arrives unevenly. Not everyone shares equally. One difficult truth quietly follows the republic into existence. Slavery remains deeply woven into its economy. Many Anglo settlers had brought enslaved African Americans with them, before the Revolution, particularly to cultivate cotton. The institution continued under the Republic of Texas, shaping its economy, politics, and society in profound ways. This remains one of the most uncomfortable parts of the story. It cannot be ignored. Many individuals celebrated independence while others remained denied their own freedom. The contradiction becomes impossible to overlook. Historians continue exploring how these competing ideals influence both domestic politics and later decisions regarding annexation to the United States. Simple narratives rarely survive careful examination. You leave the settlement behind and continue across open prairie glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. Wildflowers sway gently around your boots. Grasshoppers leap away with every step. A meadowlark sings from the top of a weathered fence post. The landscape feels peaceful once more. Then you notice another reminder of the Republic's challenges. A small frontier cabin stands abandoned. Its roof has partially collapsed. Vines creep across the doorway. No dramatic mystery surrounds it. Perhaps the family moved. Perhaps repeated drought made farming impossible. Perhaps another opportunity appeared elsewhere. Frontier life often required difficult choices. Not every settlement endured. One curious question continues to interest historians today. Exactly how optimistic did ordinary Texans feel during the Republic's earliest years? Letters from the period reveal striking variety. Some describe boundless excitement about the future. Others speak of debt uncertainty and constant concern over security and finances. Both perspectives seem genuine. The Republic inspired enormous hope. It also demanded enormous resilience. As sunset approaches, you arrive beside a quiet river crossing. Several travelers have already gathered there for the evening. Someone prepares venison stew in a cast-iron pot. Fresh cornbread bakes nearby, filling the cooling air with a rich, comforting aroma. Children collect smooth stones along the riverbank, while older adults share stories beside the growing fire. The conversation turns toward tomorrow. Will the Republic survive? Will more settlers arrive? Will other nations recognize this new country? No one knows. That uncertainty hangs gently above the camp like the first evening stars appearing overhead. You gaze across the water where the fading sunlight paints the surface in brilliant shades of gold and copper. The Republic of Texas now exists. Its future remains unwritten. Ahead lie financial troubles, diplomatic negotiations, border disputes, and growing conversations about joining the United States. Those questions will shape the years to come. For tonight, however, the river flows peacefully beneath the darkening sky. The fire crackles softly. The breeze grows cooler, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another chapter quietly waits to be remembered. Section 14. The morning begins beneath a sky of soft pearl and pale blue. Thin clouds drift lazily overhead, their edges glowing with the first light of sunrise. The camp beside the river is only beginning to awaken. Someone quietly stirs glowing embers back into flame. A kettle begins to hum above the fire. The comforting aroma of fresh coffee mingles with the scent of damp grass, mesquite smoke, and cool river mist that still hangs low across the water. You linger for a moment. The river seems in no hurry. Neither are you. Its gentle current has carried people for thousands of years. Hunters, traders, missionaries, soldiers, settlers, and dreamers alike. Each generation believed it was building a different future. Yet the water itself simply continued flowing south unchanged by flags or governments. That quiet thought stays with you as your journey continues into the years of the Republic of Texas. Independence has been won. Now comes the difficult part, keeping it. At first glance, the Republic appears remarkably ambitious. It claims an enormous territory, stretching far beyond its settled communities. On maps produced by its government, Texas seems vast enough to rival many European nations. Maps can be persuasive. Reality is often less cooperative. You follow a rough wagon road winding across open prairie where wildflowers sway gently beneath a warm spring breeze. Bluebonnets blanket entire hillsides with brilliant shades of blue, while Indian paintbrush adds splashes of vivid red among the grasses. The landscape looks almost effortless. Life upon it certainly is not. Ahead you reach the growing town of Houston, established in 1836, and named after the Republic's first president. It is still young, still muddy, and still finding its identity. The streets are busy, not polished. Fresh tree stumps reveal where forests have only recently been cleared. Wagons struggle through deep ruts left by yesterday's rain. Chickens wander freely between unfinished storefronts, while dogs sleep comfortably beneath shaded porches. Someone jokes that the mud has become an official citizen. No one disagrees. The smell of freshly sawn pine fills the warm morning air. Hammers echo steadily from new buildings rising along the streets. Merchants unpack barrels of flour, coffee, sugar, and iron tools delivered after long journeys from the Gulf Coast. Everything feels temporary, yet optimistic. Inside a modest government office, clerks sit beside open windows struggling against the growing heat. Sheets of handwritten correspondence cover their desks. Maps overlap one another across rough wooden tables. Paperwork has multiplied. A republic, you quickly discover, produces remarkable quantities of paper. One official sighs while reading another letter requesting financial assistance. Another studies reports describing conditions along the frontier. A third carefully calculates customs or revenue with increasing concern. The Republic of Texas has inherited an enormous problem: debt. The revolution proved expensive. Building a new government costs even more. The treasury rarely contains enough money to satisfy every need. Soldiers require payment. Roads require maintenance. Diplomats require funding. The list never seems to grow shorter. Historians generally agree that financial instability became one of the Republic's greatest challenges. Different governments proposed various solutions, including loans, land sales tariffs, and the printing of paper currency. Some ideas worked briefly, others less so. One particularly memorable experiment involved issuing government notes that soon became known simply as redbacks because of their distinctive colour. At first, people accepted them. Gradually, confidence weakened. Their value declined. Someone eventually joked that carrying enough money to buy dinner required stronger pockets than actual wealth. Economic humour has always existed. Even on the frontier, you leave the government offices and continue toward the bustling marketplace. The atmosphere is wonderfully lively. A blacksmith shapes glowing iron into horseshoes while sparks dance through the shaded workshop. Nearby, women arrange baskets overflowing with vegetables gathered from nearby farms. Fresh peaches, squash, corn, beans. The rich scent of ripe fruit mixes pleasantly with leather cedar lumber and warm bread emerging from a nearby bakery. Daily life remains surprisingly cheerful. Children race after one another through muddy streets, laughing whenever someone narrowly avoids stepping into another puddle. Their parents shake their heads with patient amusement. Mud becomes unavoidable. Complaining changes very little. Outside town, ranchers drive small herds of cattle across open pasture. Cotton fields gradually expand beside fertile rivers. Trade along the Gulf Coast increases slowly but steadily. The Republic possesses remarkable natural wealth. Turning that potential into reliable prosperity takes far longer. Far to the northeast, another challenge quietly occupies government attention: diplomatic recognition. Winning independence on the battlefield represented only one step. Convincing other nations to formally recognize the Republic of Texas required careful negotiation. The United States eventually extended recognition. Several European nations followed. Mexico did not. The disagreement remained unresolved. The border itself became another persistent question. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its southern boundary. Mexico maintained that the Nueces River marked the proper frontier. Between those rivers stretched hundreds of miles where competing claims created ongoing uncertainty. Maps again, reality again. Historians continue discussing how firmly the government actually controlled portions of these disputed regions during the Republic's existence. Official declarations often exceeded practical authority across such immense distances. The frontier remained wonderfully resistant to neat boundaries. You ride beside a group of surveyors carefully measuring land. Their equipment appears surprisingly delicate against the enormous Texas landscape. Chains stretch across open fields, compasses glint beneath bright sunlight. Wooden stakes mark future property lines. One surveyor quietly laughs. The prairie refuses to stay inside straight lines. His companions smile knowingly. Nature rarely respects geometry. As afternoon warmth settles over the countryside, you arrive at a modest frontier courthouse. Several settlers wait patiently outside beneath the shade of cottonwood trees. One wishes to register land ownership. Another hopes to settle a dispute involving livestock. A third simply needs official copies of government documents. Building a nation often means building institutions. Slowly, patiently, one conversation at a time. Yet while officials draft laws inside tidy buildings, life beyond settled communities remains far less predictable. Many indigenous nations continue defending their own homelands. Raids and counter-raids occur across different regions. Frontier families often live with uncertainty that no government proclamation can erase. No single experience defines every settlement. Some communities enjoy years of relative peace. Others endure repeated hardship. The Republic's leaders struggle constantly to balance limited resources against enormous responsibilities. As evening approaches, golden sunlight spreads across the prairie once more. You stop beside a quiet ranch where several vaqueros and Anglo ranchers work together, repairing a damaged corral. Their techniques blend naturally. Spanish traditions developed across generations now shape the growing cattle industry throughout Texas. The exchange feels effortless. No formal lesson, simply practical knowledge shared through experience. History often grows strongest this way, not through speeches, but through cooperation. One elderly rancher smiles while watching a younger hand expertly throw a lariat. "My grandfather learned that from vaquero," he says softly. "And now you'll teach someone else." A simple sentence. A remarkable legacy. The evening meal gathers everyone beneath the wide Texas sky. Beef slowly roasts over mesquite coals. Fresh tortillas rest beside cornbread. Beans simmer gently in black iron pots. Children chase fireflies appearing among the tall grass, while adults exchange quiet stories about weather crops and tomorrow's work. The Republic remains uncertain. Life continues anyway. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of these years. Governments may struggle. Currencies may lose value. Borders may remain disputed. Yet ordinary people continue planting seeds whose harvest they hope to see months later. Hope itself becomes a daily habit. Darkness settles gently across the ranch. Coyotes begin calling from distant hilly hills. Above you, countless stars return to their familiar places just as they have throughout every chapter of this journey. Tomorrow, Texas will face another great transformation. The question of whether this young republic should remain independent or join the United States can no longer be postponed. The prairie grows quiet, the fire burns low, and history once again prepares to change beneath the endless Texas sky. Section 15. The first glow of sunrise spreads gently across the prairie, painting the eastern sky with soft shades of amber peach and pale blue. A cool breeze carries the scent of dew-soaked grass through a quiet stand of live oaks, where yesterday's campfire has become little more than warm ash. Somewhere beyond the trees, cattle stir lazily before beginning of another day of grazing. Their low calls drift across the open country, blending with the cheerful chorus of meadowlarks welcoming the morning. The Republic of Texas wakes with them, not all at once. One ranch, one town, one lonely cabin at a time. You shoulder your small pack and continue along a wagon road that has grown noticeably busier than the trails you followed only a few years ago. More travelers pass in both directions. Freight wagons creak beneath heavy loads of cotton. Ranchers drive cattle toward growing markets. Families arrive with hopeful faces, wondering whether this vast land might finally become the home they have always imagined. The future seems open, yet uncertainty still walks beside every traveler. Nearly a decade has passed since Texas declared itself an independent republic. During those years, people have built farms, opened businesses, founded schools, elected governments, and survived droughts, floods, epidemics, and financial hardship. The republic has endured. Whether it can continue doing so remains another question. You arrive in the small capital of Austin, established only a few years earlier along the banks of the Colorado River. The town still feels wonderfully unfinished. Fresh-cut cedar perfumes the morning air. Wooden sidewalks stop unexpectedly where construction has not yet caught up with ambition. Ox carts slowly navigate muddy streets while merchants sweep dust from storefronts that only recently opened for business. Everything seems to be growing, even confidence. The broad Colorado River glides quietly beside the settlement, reflecting scattered cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmer in the gentle breeze. Children skip stones across the water, while fishermen patiently cast handmade lines into calm pools where catfish hide beneath submerged logs. The river appears eternal. The government beside it does not. Inside a modest meeting hall, lawmakers gather around long wooden tables. Windows remain open despite the heat allowing fresh air, and occasionally curious birds to interrupt the discussions. Voices remain calm, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes frustrated. One subject dominates nearly every conversation. Should the Republic of Texas remain independent, or should it join the United States? The question touches every aspect of life. Economics, security, trade, diplomacy, identity. No answer satisfies everyone. Historians generally agree that support for annexation steadily increased during the Republic's later years, although opinions varied considerably. Some Texans believed independence offered unlimited possibilities. Others worried that the young nation lacked the financial strength and military resources necessary for long-term survival. Neither position lacked logic. The debate was genuine. You quietly observe lawmakers studying maps spread across polished tables, worn smooth by countless discussions. Some point toward distant frontiers requiring protection. Others examine reports describing government debt or the slow pace of international trade. The numbers rarely inspire optimism. The Republic still struggles financially. Taxes remain unpopular. Paper currency continues causing frustration. Roads require improvement. Frontier defense consumes enormous resources. One official leans back with a weary smile. It is expensive, he says softly, to build an entire country. No one argues. Side feels considerably less political. A blacksmith hammers a glowing iron into wagon wheels while sparks leap like tiny fireflies. The rhythmic ringing echoes through the warm afternoon air. Nearby, a woman sells fresh peaches from woven baskets placed carefully beneath the shade of a pecan tree. Their sweet fragrance fills the marketplace. A baker removes loaves of bread from a brick oven and the comforting aroma drifts along the street, causing several children to pause hopefully outside the shop. Some temptations never change. You continue towards the edge of town where several ranchers have gathered beneath a sprawling oak. Their conversation begins with cattle prices, then shifts toward weather. Eventually someone quietly mentions annexation. The group grows thoughtful. One older rancher gazes across the open prairie before speaking. I've watched 3 flags fly over this land, he says. Spain, Mexico, the Republic. He pauses. I wonder if another one is coming. His words linger in the warm air. The conversation that follows remains remarkably respectful. One neighbor believes that joining the United States would provide greater economic stability. Another worries Texas might lose some measure of its independence. A third simply hopes whichever decision is made will allow his children to live peacefully. Practical hopes, rather than dramatic speeches. Meanwhile, events far beyond Texas continue shaping the discussion. Leaders in Washington carefully consider annexation. Some welcome the idea enthusiastically. Others worry about international consequences, particularly relations with Mexico. Questions surrounding slavery also influence the debate, as adding, Texas could alter the political balance between free and slave states within the United States. This issue casts a long shadow. It cannot be separated from the story. Many settlers who supported annexation also wished to preserve slavery, while opponents often recognized that Texas would intensify national disagreements already growing more difficult to resolve. Historians continue examining how these competing motivations influence political decisions on both sides of the border. Simple explanations remain incomplete. The afternoon sun climbs high overhead. Cicadas fill the oak trees with their steady chorus while horses doze beneath scattered patches of shade. You stop beside a small schoolhouse where children practice reading aloud from worn books carried across hundreds of miles. Their voices rise cheerfully through the open windows. Education has found the frontier. One lesson describes rivers, another teaches arithmetic. A little girl struggles briefly over a difficult word before smiling proudly when she finally pronounces it correctly. Her classmates quietly applaud. Progress often arrives this gently, Vila, not with fanfare, but with patience. Nearby, the town's newspaper editor carefully arranges pieces of metal type inside a printing press. Every article must be assembled one letter at a time before ink touches paper. The work demands extraordinary care. News travels faster now, though still far slower than rumour. Editorials argue both for and against annexation. Readers discuss them in shops, churches, homes and taverns. The future remains wonderfully uncertain. Then in 1845, everything changes. The United States formally approves the annexation of Texas. After nearly 10 years as an independent republic, Texas becomes the 28th state. No trumpet echoes across every prairie. No single moment transforms every town simultaneously. Instead, officials lower one flag, raise another. Documents receive new seals. Government offices begin adapting to new responsibilities. Daily life continues almost immediately, yet history has turned another page. Mexico refuses to recognize the annexation. From its perspective, Texas remains disputed territory. The disagreement over borders, particularly the land between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande, becomes increasingly serious. Diplomatic tensions rise. Neither side fully retreats. Historians generally agree that annexation represented both an ending and a beginning. It ended the Republic of Texas. It also set the stage for the Mexican-American War, which would begin only a year later. Standing upon a grassy hill overlooking the Colorado River, you watch the evening sunlight spread across the growing town. The The breeze cools pleasantly. Swallows skim low above the water, catching insects invisible to your eye. Below, families gather for supper. Children laugh from front porches. Someone begins playing a fiddle while neighbors quietly join in with familiar songs. Most people are thinking about tomorrow's chores, not tomorrow's history. They cannot yet know how dramatically the coming years will reshape not only Texas, but much of North America. The stars emerge one by one above the quiet settlement. The Republic of Texas has passed into history. A new chapter begins beneath the same endless sky that has watched every nation, every people, and every dream cross this remarkable land. The night breeze whispers softly through the cottonwoods. The river keeps flowing, and far beyond the horizon, another forgotten story patiently waits for the dawn. Section 16. The dawn arrives beneath a blanket of low-grey clouds. Their soft edges drift slowly across the Texas sky, muting the sunrise until the entire prairie glows with a gentle silver light. The cool morning breeze carries the scent of damp cedar, freshly turned soil, and wild mint growing beside a narrow creek. Tiny droplets cling to spider webs stretched between tall grasses, each one briefly catching the morning light before quietly disappearing. The land feels unusually still. Even the birds seem to sing more softly. You leave Austin behind and continue eastward along a well-traveled road. Wagons pass more frequently now than ever before. Mail riders urge tired horses onward. Freight teams haul barrels, lumber, cotton and farming tools between growing towns whose populations continue to rise with surprising speed. Texas has become part of the United States, yet history has no intention of slowing down. Only months after annexation, the long disagreement over the southern border erupts into open conflict. The Mexican-American War begins in 1846. Many people remember the war through maps showing armies advancing across enormous territories. Here, however, the story feels quieter, more personal. You stop beside a modest farmhouse where a family prepares breakfast before sunrise. The smell of cornmeal cakes browning on a cast-iron griddle drifts through the cool air. Fresh coffee steams gently beside the hearth, while children still rubbing sleep from their eyes gather around the rough wooden table. Life continues. Even as distant events gather momentum, a father quietly folds a letter delivered the previous evening. Military volunteers are being organized. Neighbors have already begun leaving. His oldest son studies the folded paper without saying a word. No dramatic speech follows, only silence. Sometimes silence speaks more honestly than certainty ever could. Texas contributed thousands of volunteers during the conflict. Some believed they were defending their new state and the nation's borders. Others sought adventure or economic opportunity. Still others simply followed neighbors and relatives into military service. Motivations rarely fit inside a single sentence. Historians continued debating how strongly different communities supported the war. Newspaper editorials often sounded enthusiastic, while private letters sometimes revealed hesitation, homesickness, or uncertainty about the conflict's broader purpose. Public confidence, private complexity. The two often exist together. You continue southward toward the lower Rio Grande. The landscape changes gradually once again. The rolling hills flatten into broad coastal plains dotted with mesquite cactus and thorny brush. Warm air replaces the coolness of the morning. Cicadas begin their familiar chorus while hawks glide effortlessly above shimmering grasslands. The Rio Grande appears at last. Wide, slow, beautiful. Its muddy waters reflect towering clouds drifting overhead, while cottonwood trees line portions of its banks with welcome shade. The river seems peaceful, yet its location has become the center of an international disagreement. The United States recognizes it as the southern border of Texas. Mexico maintains that the Nueces River much farther north marks the proper boundary. Between them stretches a vast region claimed by both governments. Competing maps, competing laws, competing hopes. Exactly where authority truly existed in many parts of this disputed territory remains a fascinating scholarly question. Historians generally agree that practical control often varied from one community to another, making simple descriptions surprisingly difficult. Borders as drawn on reality beneath open skies, they rarely matched it perfectly. You reach a military encampment established beside the river. Canvas tents stretch neatly across open ground. Horses graze nearby while blacksmiths repair wagon wheels damaged during long marches. The smell of leather campfire smoke and fresh bread baking inside Dutch ovens fills the afternoon air. The soldiers appear younger than you expected. Some shave awkwardly before polished bits of metal serving as mirrors. Others write letters beneath shaded trees. One carefully mends a torn shirt instead of cleaning his rifle. Ordinary tasks fill extraordinary times. The rhythms feel familiar. Boiling coffee, feeding horses, sharpening tools, waiting. Military history often remembers Bacchus and Baptismo always remembers battles. Soldiers remember waiting. A young volunteer from Central Texas smiles while carving his initials into a small piece of cedar. I hope my mother never sees this, he laughs quietly. His friend grins. She'll probably recognize your handwriting. The conversation drifts toward home. They speak about favorite fishing species, stubborn mules, younger brothers, and peach orchards beginning to bloom. War has not erased ordinary memories. It has sharpened them. The first major engagements occur near the Rio Grande, Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma. The fighting helps establish American control of the immediate frontier before campaigns continue much up farther into Mexico. Yet Texas itself soon returns to relative quiet compared with the larger military operations unfolding hundreds of miles away. The war moves south. Its consequences do not. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you visit a riverside trading post where merchants continue exchanging goods despite the uncertain times. Cotton cloth, coffee, salt, leather, iron tools, trade persists. People still require shoes whether governments argue or not. An elderly merchant shrugs while arranging sacks of flour. Politics doesn't feed chickens, he says with a patient smile, but grain does. Practical wisdom often survives every generation. By 1848, the conflict ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico formally recognizes the Rio Grande as the international border and cedes an enormous territory to the United States, reshaping the map of North America forever. The consequences reach far beyond Texas. New lands open to American settlement. New questions emerge. New tensions quietly begin growing. Historians still examine how differently various communities experience these changes. Mexican families suddenly find themselves living within a different nation without moving a single mile. Indigenous nations confront expanding settlement across even larger areas. Newly arrived migrants pour westward seeking opportunity. One treaty, countless lives transformed. You ride north again through fertile farmland where cotton fields stretch toward the horizon. Harvest promises prosperity. Steam-powered cotton gins appear more frequently. Riverboats become busier. Railroads, though still limited, gradually begin extending their reach into the growing state. Texas enters a period of remarkable economic expansion. Much of it rests upon cotton. Much of that cotton depends upon enslaved labor. By the 1850s, slavery has become deeply embedded within the state's agricultural economy, particularly across the rich eastern counties. Enslaved African Americans clear forests, plant crops, harvest cotton, and sustain much of the wealth that many planters enjoy. This prosperity carries profound injustice. It shapes nearly every political conversation of the era. The contradiction grows increasingly difficult to ignore. As evening approaches, you arrive at a prosperous plantation overlooking a slow-moving river. The large house catches the warm golden light beautifully. Oak trees draped with Spanish moss sway gently in the cooling breeze. From a distance, the scene appears almost idyllic. Closer observation reveals another reality. Enslaved men and women continue working long after the owner's family has gathered for supper. Smoke rises from separate cabins. Children carry water. Hands tired from the day's labor continue preparing tomorrow's work. The quiet beauty of the landscape cannot erase the human cost hidden within it. Many later myths about Texas celebrated independence, opportunity, and frontier freedom. Those stories contain elements of truth. They also leave important truths untold. Historians increasingly emphasize that understanding Texas requires acknowledging both its remarkable growth and the system of slavery that helped finance much of that expansion. Neither story stands alone. The evening breeze cools the fields as the last sunlight slips below the western horizon. Fireflies appear among the tall grass. Frogs begin singing beside the river. Somewhere in the darkness, a whippoorwill calls into the gathering night. Tomorrow another storm waits beyond the horizon. Not a storm of weather, but one that will divide families, neighbors, and the entire nation. The roads of Texas are about to lead towards civil war. The stars emerge quietly overhead. The river keeps flowing. History moves forward once more. Section 17. Morning arrives beneath a sky brushed with pale silver clouds. A gentle wind moves across the prairie, bending tall grasses into slow rolling waves that shimmer beneath the growing light. The scent of damp earth lingers after a night of light rain. Mockingbirds greet the sunrise from the branches of live oaks, while somewhere beyond the distant hills, cattle begin another quiet day upon the open range. The land appears unchanged. The rivers still follow familiar paths. The oak trees still cast welcome shade. Yet beneath this peaceful morning, Texas stands on the edge of its greatest internal crisis. You continue east through prosperous farming country. Cotton fields stretch toward the horizon, their neat rows interrupted only by winding creeks and clusters of pecan trees. Large plantations stand beside modest family farms, each preparing for another growing season. Life seems ordinary, almost reassuringly so. Children walk towards small schoolhouses carrying worn books beneath their arms. Blacksmiths open workshop doors. Storekeepers sweep dusty porches before arranging sacks of flour barrels of coffee and bolts of cloth for the day's customers. Routine offers comfort, even when uncertainty quietly approaches. By the late 1850s, political disagreements across the United States have become increasingly difficult to ignore. Debates over slavery states' rights and the balance of power between the federal government and individual states dominate newspapers, legislative halls, and conversations around dinner tables. Texas finds itself deeply involved in those discussions. Not everyone reaches the same conclusions. Historians emphasize that Texans held a wide range of opinions before the Civil War. Many supported remaining within the Union. Others strongly favored secession. Still others hoped compromise might somehow prevent armed conflict altogether. Reality rarely divides neatly into two opposing camps. You pause beside a crossroads where travelers gather beneath a sprawling oak tree. A stagecoach has stopped to change horses. Passengers stretch stiff legs while exchanging the latest news carried from distant cities. Someone unfolds a newspaper printed only a few days earlier. Its pages already look worn from eager hands. Voices grow quieter. News spreads quickly now. Abraham Lincoln has been elected President of the United States. His election profoundly influences political conversations throughout the South, even though Lincoln's name appeared on relatively few Texas ballots. Many slaveholding Texans fear that future federal policies may threaten the institution of slavery, while others worry about preserving political influence within the Union. Fear often moves faster than certainty. One elderly farmer quietly folds the newspaper. "I've lived through droughts," he says. "Those always end." He gazes thoughtfully toward the horizon. "I'm not so sure about this." The others remain silent. No one laughs. During the winter of 1860 and early 1861, public meetings occur across Texas. Some communities enthusiastically support leaving the Union. Others express hesitation. County by county, opinion varies. Families sometimes discover they disagree around the same supper table. History often enters homes long before it reaches battlefields. You arrive in Austin once again. The capital feels busier than ever. Horse-drawn wagons crowd muddy streets. Government buildings overflow with visitors carrying letters, petitions, and official documents. Inside meeting halls, delegates gather to debate one question above every other. Should Texas secede? The discussions continue for days. Arguments remain passionate. Some delegates describe secession as necessary to defend local authority and slavery. Others warn of the terrible consequences that war may bring. Historians generally agree that economic concerns, constitutional arguments, regional identity, and the preservation of slavery all influence the decision in varying degrees. Modern scholarship consistently recognizes slavery as a central cause of Texas's secession, while also acknowledging the many different ways individuals understood the crisis. Simple slogans cannot contain complicated history. Eventually, the convention votes in favor of secession. Soon afterward, many Texas voters approve the decision in a statewide referendum. Texas joins the Confederate States of America. Another flag rises above government buildings. Another chapter begins. You step outside into warm afternoon sunlight. Church bells ring across the town. Some people celebrate. Others watch quietly. Not every face reflects the same emotion. For enslaved African Americans, the announcement carries no promise of freedom. Instead, the system that governs nearly every aspect of their lives appears more firmly protected than ever. Across plantations, fields, kitchens, workshops, and ranches, work continues. Cotton still requires planting. Livestock still require care. Children still grow. The routines of daily life rarely pause for political declarations. You leave Austin and travel toward a large plantation east of the Colorado River. The afternoon air grows warm beneath a cloudless sky. Cicadas sing from towering pecan trees. The sweet scent of magnolia blossoms drifts through carefully tended gardens surrounding the main house. At first glance, everything appears prosperous. White-painted fences, broad verandas, neatly arranged fields. Then your attention shifts beyond the elegant home. Enslaved families move steadily through the fields beneath the growing heat. Men guide mule-drawn plows across rich soil. Women tend long rows of cotton. Children carry water or gather firewood near modest cabins and standing far from the owner's residence. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Many of the Republic's earlier promises of liberty and independence never extended equally to everyone living in Texas. This contradiction remains one of the state's most important historical truths. As evening approaches, you visit a small frontier town where volunteers gather beneath fluttering Confederate banners. Young men embrace parents. Sweethearts exchange quiet promises. Children wave enthusiastically without fully understanding where their older brothers are going. The smell of leather saddles, fresh-cut pine and wood smoke fills the cooling air. Someone begins playing a fiddle. Others quietly sing familiar hymns. Hope and uncertainty stand side by side. Texas contributes tens of thousands of soldiers to the Confederate war effort. Many serve far from home in campaigns across Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and beyond. Ironically, relatively little large-scale fighting occurs within most of Texas itself. Instead, the state becomes an important supplier. Cotton, cattle, horses, food, weapons. The war reaches Texas through railroads, rivers, supply depots, hospitals, shortages, and letters arriving weeks late. You stop beside a modest farmhouse where a woman carefully unfolds another letter delivered by horseback. She reads it once, then again. Her children watch quietly from the doorway. The letter contains no dramatic battlefield story. Instead, her husband asks about the corn harvest, whether the roof still leaks, how much their youngest son has grown. War never completely replaces ordinary life. It merely surrounds it. As the conflict continues, shortages become increasingly common. Imported goods become difficult to obtain. Coffee grows scarce. Sugar becomes expensive. Families substitute roasted corn chicory or sweet potatoes for familiar comforts. Clothing is patched repeatedly. Metal tools are repaired instead of replaced. Resourcefulness becomes an everyday necessity. Historians often describe Texas as relatively insulated compared with battle-scarred regions farther east. That observation is broadly true, yet it should not be mistaken for peace. The burdens of war appear in quieter forms: economic strain, separated families, disease, loss, anxious waiting, and the knowledge that every letter might bring unwelcome news. The sun slips lower across the western horizon, bathing the prairie in soft gold. Long shadows stretch across grazing cattle. The evening breeze cools the fields. Crickets begin their familiar chorus. You pause beside a weathered split-rail fence. The Texas landscape remains breathtakingly beautiful. Yet beneath its beauty, the foundations of the old world are beginning to crack. The institution that has shaped so much of the state's economy and the politics is approaching its final chapter. The Confederacy's fortunes are changing. Even if many people living here cannot yet see how quickly events are unfolding, night settles gently over the prairie. Stars appear one by one above the quiet fields. Lanterns glow inside scattered farmhouses. Some families pray for victory. Others simply pray for loved ones to return safely. Few can imagine that within only a few years, emancipation will finally reach Texas, forever changing the lives of millions and reshaping the state's future. The breeze grows cooler. The prairie falls silent. History prepares to turn once again. Section 18. The first light of morning arrives quietly after a night of gentle rain. Mist rises from the Brazos River in delicate ribbons, drifting slowly across fields where the scent of wet earth fills the cool air. Dew sparkles upon tall prairie grass, and mockingbirds greet the sunrise from weathered fence posts that have stood through seasons of prosperity, hardship, and war alike. The landscape feels renewed. The people living upon it are still learning how to begin again. The Civil War has ended. For 4 long years, the conflict reshaped families, communities, and governments across the United States. Now in 1865, Texas enters an entirely different kind of struggle, not one fought primarily with rifles and cannons, but with difficult questions about freedom, justice, rebuilding, and the future. You follow a dusty road toward the town of Galveston. The Gulf breeze carries the salty scent of the sea long before the harbor comes into view. Ships rest quietly offshore while dockworkers begin another day's labor beneath an increasingly warm summer sky. The town appears busy. Merchants unload barrels of flour. Fishermen repair weathered nets. Children chase one another along narrow streets lined with wooden storefronts. At first glance, life seems almost ordinary. Yet beneath the familiar routines, history is about to change forever. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston with Union troops. Soon afterward, General Order No. 3 was publicly announced, informing the people of Texas that enslaved African Americans were free under the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been issued more than 2 years earlier. For thousands of people, the words changed everything. Freedom had finally reached Texas. The announcement did not raise hardship overnight, but it marked a profound turning point. Today, June 19th, is remembered as Juneteenth, commemorating that historic moment and the long struggle for freedom that surrounded it. You stand quietly beneath the shade of a live oak as townspeople gather to hear the order read aloud. Some listen in silence. Others struggle to believe what they have heard. Many embrace family members. Some simply weep. No single emotion can capture such a moment. Historians remind us that freedom arrived differently for different people. Some plantation owners delayed informing those they had enslaved. Others resisted the transition in countless ways. Newly freed families often faced enormous uncertainty regarding employment, housing, education, and personal safety. Freedom itself had arrived. Equality had not. You continue inland through fertile farming country. The cotton fields remain. The rivers continue flowing. But the labor system that had shaped so much of Texas agriculture is undergoing dramatic change. Formerly enslaved families begin searching for separated relatives. Some establish independent communities. Others negotiate labor-service contracts with former owners or become sharecroppers hoping to build stable lives despite limited opportunities. Every journey begins differently. Some travel only a few miles. Others cross entire states searching for husbands, wives, parents, or children from whom they had been separated years before. Few historical stories feel more deeply human. Along one quiet road you meet an elderly couple walking slowly beneath the afternoon sun. They carry little more than blankets, a cooking pot, and a carefully folded piece of paper containing the name of a daughter last seen many years earlier. They do not know where she lives now, only that she may still be somewhere in Texas. Hope guides their steps. Sometimes that is enough. The years following the Civil War become known as Reconstruction. Federal officials, military authorities, capos, local governments, teachers, ministers, business owners and ordinary citizens all participate in rebuilding society, though often with sharply different ideas about what that rebuilding should look like. Texas adopts new state constitutions. Political leadership changes several times. Questions about voting rights, public education, and civil rights dominate public debate. The process proves anything but simple. You arrive at a newly established school where children gather inside a modest wooden building. The room contains little furniture. The books are few. The enthusiasm is abundant. A teacher carefully writes the alphabet across a slate board while students repeat each letter together. Some are very young. Others are adults who had never before been allowed the opportunity to learn to read. Their determination fills the room. Education becomes one of the great hopes of Reconstruction. Across Texas, churches, charitable organizations, local communities, and the Freedmen's Bureau all contribute in different ways to establishing schools for formerly enslaved people despite persistent shortages of money, buildings, and teachers. Knowledge itself becomes a form of freedom. Outside, however, rebuilding remains uneven. Many farms struggle financially. Railroads damaged or neglected during the war require repair. Markets fluctuate. Drought occasionally returns to remind everyone that nature recognizes no political victory. Economic recovery takes pains. So does trust. You continue westward, where the landscape gradually changes once again. The forests thin. Wide grasslands stretch toward distant horizons. Here another transformation is quietly beginning. Millions of longhorn cattle roam freely across enormous ranges, descendants of animals introduced generations earlier during Spanish rule. During the Civil War, many herds had multiplied with relatively little supervision. Now they represent extraordinary opportunity. Demand for the beef grows rapidly in eastern cities. The challenge lies in getting the cattle there. You spend the evening beside a ranch where vaqueros and cowboys gather around a mesquite fire after a long day's work. Their clothing reflects practicality rather than legend. Wide-brimmed hats protect against relentless sun. Leather chaps guard against thorny brush. Ropes hang neatly coiled beside weathered saddles. Conversation remains relaxed. Someone tells a humorous story about an especially stubborn steer. Laughter circles the fire. The image differs greatly from the dramatic gunfighters of popular fiction. Historians consistently note that real cowboy life involved long hours, difficult weather, constant responsibility, and surprisingly little excitement compared with later novels and films. Many cowboys were young. Many were poor. Some were formerly enslaved African Americans seeking new opportunities. Others were Mexican vaqueros whose riding skills and ranching traditions profoundly influenced cattle culture throughout Texas. Still others came from indigenous communities or immigrant families. The open range brought together people from remarkably diverse backgrounds. Around the fire, no one speaks much about creating legends. They speak about tomorrow's drive, finding water, repairing fences, avoiding storms. Practical concerns always come first. As darkness settles over the prairie, countless stars emerge above the camp. Coyotes call from distant hills. The smell of mesquite smoke lingers pleasantly in the cool night air. Texas is rebuilding itself once again. Freedom is expanding, though unevenly. Communities are growing, though imperfectly. The cattle trails stretching northward hint at new prosperity, while railroads slowly push farther across the state. And somewhere far beyond these quiet grasslands, engineers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers are beginning to imagine another resource hidden deep beneath Texas soil. They cannot yet see it, neither can you. But before many decades have passed, oil will transform this land as completely as horses, cotton, or cattle ever did. For now, the prairie rests beneath the stars. The campfire burns low. The wind carries the scent of sage across the sleeping grasslands, and history patient as always prepares for another remarkable dawn. Section 19. The first rays of sunlight spill gently across the wide Texas prairie, turning the tall grasses into waves of gold that ripple beneath a cool autumn breeze. Morning mist lingers above a narrow creek, slowly dissolving as the warmth of the day begins to spread across the countryside. A pair of white-tailed deer step cautiously from the trees to drink before disappearing once more into the quiet woods. Meadowlarks greet the sunrise with cheerful songs, while somewhere beyond the distant hills the low rumble of cattle drifts across the open range. The land feels timeless, yet the Texas before you is changing faster than at any moment in its long history. The great cattle drives that followed the Civil War have transformed enormous stretches of the state. Longhorn herds move north along trails that have become famous: the Chisholm Trail, the Western Trail, and many lesser-known routes that carried millions of cattle toward expanding railroads and growing eastern cities. You ride beside one of these great drives. Hundreds of longhorns stretch across the prairie in a slow-moving river of horns dust and steady determination. Hooves drum softly against the earth while experienced trail hands guide the herd with remarkable patience. Contrary to popular films, most days pass quietly. The work is repetitive: watching, guiding, repairing harnesses, finding water, avoiding unnecessary excitement. Real cowboy life leaves little room for dramatic showdowns. The men and sometimes boys riding beside you come from many different backgrounds. A Mexican vaquero expertly swings his rawhide riata with effortless precision, demonstrating techniques perfected over generations. Nearby, an African-American cowboy quietly checks a horse's injured hoof before continuing the journey. A young immigrant from Europe learns how to read approaching weather simply by watching distant clouds. An older trail boss speaks little. He rarely needs to. Experience itself becomes a language. Historians estimate that roughly 1 in 4 cowboys during the Great Cattle Drive era was African-American, while many others were Mexican vaqueros whose traditions shaped nearly every aspect of ranching in Texas, from saddles and spurs to roping techniques and cattle handling. The mythology often celebrated only one image. Reality was considerably richer. As the morning grows warmer, the trail reaches a shallow river crossing. The cattle hesitate briefly before entering the water. Patient voices, gentle whistles, a few carefully positioned riders. Slowly the herd moves forward. Mud swirls around thousands of hooves. Sunlight dances upon the rippling water. The crossing succeeds not because of dramatic courage, but because of calm experience. Much of history works that way. Far from the trail, another transformation quietly reshapes Texas. Railroads spread steadily across the state. You soon hear one before seeing it. A distant whistle echoes across the prairie, followed by the rhythmic clatter of steel wheels meeting iron rails. Moments later, a steam locomotive appears, trailing a plume of white smoke beneath the brilliant blue sky. Children wave enthusiastically from a nearby farmhouse. The engineer answers with another cheerful blast of the whistle. The railroad changes everything. Journeys that once required weeks now take days. Mail arrives faster. Markets expand. Small frontier settlements become thriving towns almost overnight. Farmers gain access to distant buyers. New immigrants arrive in increasing numbers, bringing languages, traditions, recipes, music, and skills from across Europe, Mexico, and beyond. Texas becomes more connected than ever before. The pace of change continues to accelerate. You arrive in a bustling railroad town where the streets hum with activity. Fresh lumber fills the air with its clean, resinous scent. Blacksmiths shoe horses beside wagon repair shops. General stores display goods from places that once seemed unimaginably distant: fine cloth from the Northeast, coffee from Latin America, machinery manufactured in growing industrial cities. The world has become smaller, opportunity has become larger. Yet progress brings difficult consequences as well. As railroads extend farther west, indigenous nations face increasing pressure upon lands they have occupied for generations. The great buffalo herds, once numbering in the millions across the southern plains, declined with astonishing speed during the late 19th century. Commercial hunting, railroad expansion, and changing settlement patterns dramatically reshaped the environment. Historians widely recognize the destruction of the buffalo as one of the defining ecological and cultural transformations of the American West. The loss extends far beyond wildlife. Entire ways of life are disrupted. Standing upon a grassy ridge, you watch a vast prairie stretching toward the horizon. It remains breathtakingly beautiful, but it is changing. Fences begin appearing where open range once extended without interruption. Barbed wire, patented in the 1870s, quietly transforms ranching throughout Texas. Land that had long remained accessible becomes divided into private pastures. The invention seems remarkably simple. Its consequences prove enormous. Arguments over water access, grazing rights, and property boundaries become increasingly common. The era of the completely open range slowly begins to fade. One elderly rancher runs his hand thoughtfully along a newly stretched fence. "I suppose this is the future," he says. Then he smiles gently. "But I do miss seeing the horizon without interruptions." His words carry no bitterness, only reflection. As afternoon sunlight softens, you continue toward a growing city unlike anything Texas has previously known. Brick buildings rise several stories above busy streets. Electric streetlights begin replacing older lanterns in certain neighborhoods. Telephone wires stretch overhead. Horse-drawn wagons share the roads with electric streetcars. Modern Texas is quietly emerging. Then almost unexpectedly, history uncovers another extraordinary gift hidden beneath the ground. In 1901, near the small community of Spindletop outside Beaumont, drillers strike an enormous oil reservoir. The Lucas Gusher erupts dramatically into the air, sending a towering column of oil soaring over 100 feet above the derrick. For several astonishing days, crude oil pours across the landscape faster than anyone can contain it. The event becomes legendary. Historians often describe Spindletop as one of the most important discoveries in modern industrial history because it dramatically expanded America's oil supply and helped launch the modern petroleum industry. Everything begins changing once again. Investment floods into Texas. New companies appear almost overnight. Railroads expand further. Automobiles become increasingly practical. Factories require fuel. Cities grow rapidly. You visit Beaumont only a few years after the Great Discovery. The atmosphere feels electric. Hotels overflow with investors. Surveyors hurry through muddy streets carrying maps beneath their arms. Engineers discuss drilling equipment over hurried meals. Speculators dream of fortunes waiting beneath nearby fields. Not every dream succeeds. Some fortunes vanish almost as quickly as they appear. Others reshape entire industries. The smell of crude oil now mingles with fresh lumber, machine grease, and coal smoke. It is the scent of a new century beginning. Yet even amid rapid industrial growth, reminders of older Texas remain everywhere. A lone cowboy still rides across distant grasslands. Spanish missions continue standing quietly beneath ancient live oaks. Indigenous archaeological sites rest silently beneath the soil. Old cattle trails become county roads. History does not disappear. It accumulates. As evening settles across the state, you climb a gentle hill, overlooking a landscape unlike any you have seen during your journey. In one direction, cattle graze peacefully beneath the fading sunlight. In another, a steam locomotive pulls freight toward distant markets. Farther away, an oil derrick rises against the orange horizon. 3 different eras, one remarkable place. The myths of Texas often celebrate fearless cowboys, dramatic gunfights, and endless frontier adventure. Those stories contain pieces of truth, but the real Texas has always been far more diverse, more complicated, and more deeply human than any legend could fully capture. The stars begin appearing one by one. A cool breeze carries the scent of prairie grass across the quiet hillside. Tomorrow your journey will reach its final chapter, not by leaving Texas behind, but by discovering the many hidden histories that still live beneath its famous legends. The night grows peaceful, the wind whispers softly across the grass, and the past waits patiently for one last story. Section 20. The morning has fully arrived. Golden sunlight pours across the Texas landscape, illuminating rolling prairies, winding rivers, rocky hills, dense pine forests, and the distant mountains of the west. A gentle breeze carries the fragrance of blooming bluebonnets, fresh cedar, and warm earth that has witnessed countless generations come and go. Birdsong fills the air. A mockingbird calls from the branch of an ancient live oak. Red-tailed hawks circle effortlessly upon rising currents of warm air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, cattle graze quietly, while fishing boats leave the Gulf Coast harbors with the first light of day. Everything feels wonderfully alive. You stop upon a limestone ridge overlooking a landscape that now seems both familiar and entirely new. When your journey first began, this land appeared almost empty. That illusion has long disappeared. Instead, every valley, river, canyon, and prairie has revealed another layer of human experience stretching back thousands upon thousands of years. You have walked beside the first Paleo-Indians who crossed into this remarkable landscape near the end of the last ice age. You have visited flourishing indigenous societies whose cities were built not of stone castles but of trade networks, agriculture, diplomacy, and generations of accumulated knowledge. You watched Spanish explorers struggle to understand a land that could never truly be conquered by maps alone. You stood quietly inside mission courtyards where faith, cooperation, misunderstanding, and resistance existed together beneath the same bell towers. You traveled through the vast Comancheria, where horseback skill transformed an entire civilization and reshaped the balance of power across the Great Plains. You witnessed Mexican Texas, where cultures blended more often than later myths sometimes suggest. You waited within the thick limestone walls of the Alamo and discovered that history often contains more uncertainty than certainty. You watched a republic struggle to become a nation. You followed annexation into the United States. You observed war reshape borders. You saw slavery expand, endure, and finally come to an end through emancipation. You watched Reconstruction slowly rebuild lives while never fully resolving every injustice left behind. You rode beside cattle drives that carried not only beef northward, but also traditions inherited from Mexican vaqueros, African-American cowboys, indigenous guides, immigrant laborers, and countless unnamed workers whose stories rarely reached history books. You stood beside this great spindle-top gusher and witnessed oil announce the arrival of an entirely different Texas. Each chapter felt important. None stands entirely alone. That may be the greatest lesson this journey offers. History is rarely a straight road. It's more like the Brazos River winding patiently across the countryside. Sometimes calm, sometimes flooding, always moving. The familiar image of Texas often emphasizes independence above all else. The lone cowboy, the fearless ranger, the isolated frontier cabin. These figures certainly existed, but they were never the whole story. Texas has always depended upon communities, upon cooperation, upon neighbors helping neighbors during droughts, floods, epidemics, and uncertain harvests. It has depended upon indigenous knowledge passed across generations, upon Spanish ranching tradition, upon Mexican legal system and agricultural experience, upon German farmers introducing new methods, upon Czech immigrants establishing thriving communities, upon African Americans whose labor resilience, culture, and leadership profoundly shaped the state despite centuries of injustice, upon countless others arriving from every corner of the world carrying languages, recipes, music, faith, and dreams that gradually became part of Texas itself. The state's greatest strength has rarely been simplicity. It has always been diversity. You continue walking through a small, modern Texas town. Children ride bicycles beneath towering pecan trees. Families gather outside neighborhood bakeries where the scent of warm bread drifts into the morning air. Church bells ring softly across quiet streets. Pickup trucks share the roads with electric vehicles. Historic brick buildings stand beside gleaming glass offices. Old and new exist together, just as they always have. Nearby, a local museum quietly preserves arrowheads discovered beside rivers where people camped 10,000 years ago. Inside another gallery, visitors study Spanish colonial maps. Across the hall, photographs capture African-American communities celebrating Juneteenth during the late 19th century. One room displays beautifully crafted vaquero saddles. Another preserves cowboy equipment worn smooth through decades of honest work. The exhibits never argue. They simply remind visitors that history contains many voices. Outside, once again, you notice something wonderful. The ordinary. People continue living their lives without constantly thinking about history. Parents walk children to school. Gardeners trim roses. Construction workers raise another building. Students hurry toward universities. Scientists conduct research. Musicians write songs. Farmers watch the weather. Life moves forward. It always has. Yet beneath every modern street lies another older road. Beneath every courthouse once stood another meeting place. Beneath every city remain traces of earlier communities whose names have sometimes faded but whose influence has never truly disappeared. Archaeologists continue making remarkable discoveries throughout Texas. Each carefully uncovered campsite, pottery, fragment stone, tool mission, foundation cemetery, or forgotten settlement reminds us that the past still rests quietly beneath our feet. Historians continue revising earlier interpretations as new evidence emerges. Old assumptions give way to better understanding. That process never truly ends, nor should it. Good history does not seek comfortable myths. It seeks honest question. One of those questions has followed you throughout this journey. Why do certain stories become famous while others remain nearly invisible? Part of the answer lies in memory itself. Battles are dramatic. Victories inspire celebration. Defeats encourage reflection. They are easier to remember than decades of farming trading, teaching children, repairing fences, harvesting koan crops, building churches, cooking meals, writing letters, or simply surviving another difficult season. Yet ordinary life is where most history actually happens, not upon famous or battlefields, but around family tables, inside schoolhouses, beside rivers, within workshops, across quiet front porches where one generation slowly teaches the next. You pause once more beneath the shade of an enormous live oak whose branches have stretched toward the Texas sky for centuries. Its roots disappear deep into limestone soil enriched by countless seasons. Storms have bent its limbs. Lightning has scarred its bark. Still it grows. Perhaps Texas resembles that tree. Its history includes hardship alongside achievement, conflict beside cooperation, injustice beside remarkable courage. The story cannot be understood honestly by choosing only one half. Both belong. The wind gently stirs the leaves overhead. Sunlight filters through the branches in shimmering patterns that dance across the ground. You take one final look across the landscape. Somewhere far away, the Rio Grande continues its patient journey toward the Gulf. The Brazos still follows its winding course. The Llano Estacado still meets the endless ski. The piney woods remain filled with birdsong. The hill country still bursts into fields of bluebonnets each spring. The desert still glows beneath astonishing sunsets. The Gulf waves continue washing quietly against sandy shores. The land remembers everything, even when people forget. As the afternoon slowly fades toward evening, golden light softens across the prairie, just as it did when this journey first began. The breeze grows cooler. The sounds of the day become quieter. You realize that the darkest history of Texas was never hidden simply because people wished to conceal it. More often it became hidden because every generation naturally simplified stories that were in truth wonderfully complicated. History asks us to look again, to listen more carefully, to make room for voices that once stood quietly beyond the edge of the familiar picture. Doing so does not diminish Texas. It enriches it. The myths remain part of the story, but they are no longer the entire story. Now as evening settles gently across this remarkable land, the stars begin appearing one by one above the same vast sky that watched the first hunters, the first villagers, the first explorers, the first ranchers, the first railroad builders, the first oil workers, and every generation since. The prairie falls quiet. The wind whispers softly through the tall grass. Your long walk across the hidden history of Texas has finally come to its end. And like every good bedtime story, it leaves you not with certainty, but with a quieter curiosity about the countless forgotten lives that made the world you know today. Sleep comes gently. The story rests. The land continues.